The protagonist was summoned from another world, torn from Earth where he served as the commander-in-chief of humanity's resistance against monsters. The Empire called him their savior, their legendary otherworldly hero. They promised him glory, purpose, and most importantly freedom. For years, he fought tirelessly as the Empire's loyal weapon, cutting down countless enemies, completing every mission they demanded. He believed in their promise that once he defeated the Demon King, he would finally return home. He sacrificed everything: his youth, his life, his future, all for that single promise of freedom. He succeeded. He defeated the Demon King and fulfilled his end of the bargain, but the Empire had no intention of letting their ultimate weapon go free. Count Brandenburg, the holy swordsman he had served so faithfully, drove a blade through his back. He was just a tool to be used and discarded. As he lay dying, blood pooling beneath him, he cursed the Empire, cursed the betrayal, cursed everything that had used him. Soul burned with rage and vengeance even as his life faded away. But death was not the end. His soul found new life, reincarnated into the body of Dale, the newborn son of Duke Saxon. He retained every memory of his past life, every ounce of his tactical genius, and most importantly his burning desire for revenge against the Empire that betrayed him. This time, he would not be anyone's pawn. This time, he would control his own destiny. A monstrous jaw tears through the darkness. The year is 2045. Earth has become a battlefield. Giant beasts overrun the ruined cities. A colossal shadow rises over the fallen warriors. Terror fills a soldier's eyes. As death closes in, a deadly tentacle crashes down, ready to claim his life. But in a single blinding slash, the protagonist cuts the attack apart. The monster lets out a furious roar and prepares to crush them all. Without hesitation, the protagonist charges forward as purple energy erupts around him. His blade slices through the massive appendage, sending dark blood spraying across the battlefield. He leaps away, just before the monstrous black mass comes crashing down. His eyes remain locked on the enemy, never losing focus. He raises his pistol and fires straight into the darkness. He orders his men to get up and keep pushing forward, recognizing their commander. Remaining soldiers rally behind him. With his rifle at the ready, the protagonist marches toward the battlefield once more. For decades, humanity has fought this endless war. Only a handful of soldiers remain to face their final enemy. The protagonist steadies his aim, locking onto his target. Suddenly, a massive golden magic circle appears in the sky. The protagonist stares upward, unable to believe what he's seeing. The golden circle engulfs the protagonist in blinding radiance. A soldier drops his weapon. Golden chains burst from the magic circle. The chains wrap around the protagonist, dragging him into the sky. He struggles against the glowing restraints. As an unfamiliar voice echoes through the air, hidden figures watch from the shadows, celebrating their success. They realize the otherworldly hero has finally been summoned. The protagonist demands to know where he is. An old man dressed in robes welcomes the otherworldly hero to the Empire. He bows respectfully, hiding his true intentions behind a polite smile. The protagonist stands motionless, golden chains wrapped tightly around his neck. The old man pleads with him to defeat the Demon King. His face twists with desperation. As he begs for salvation, he asks the protagonist to save their world. The protagonist struggles to process the absurd mention of a Demon King. Completely confused, he demands an explanation. His expression hardens with anger as he asks who these people really are. Then he shouts that he should be back in Korea. The oath of restraint activates. As golden lightning tears through the screaming protagonist, with a cold expression, the old man explains that obedience will spare him from more pain. A glowing magic orb rests in his hand, controlling the protagonist's very life. The protagonist coughs violently, struggling to catch his breath. His eyes burn with fury at their twisted idea of kindness. The old man and the hooded figure repeat their demand, ordering him to defeat the Demon King. Standing over him, the old man commands him to save the Empire. A heavy sword crashes onto the glowing magic circle. The old man promises that once everything is over, he will return him to his own world. But the smile on his face reveals nothing but manipulation. The two continue pressuring him, refusing to accept any answer but yes. Sweat rolls down his face as he considers the impossible choice before him. In the end, he reluctantly agrees. He reflects on the cruel fate of being dragged into another world just to fight another war. Clad in dark armor, he becomes the otherworldly hero of a corrupt empire. Day after day, he fights without rest. Mission after mission, he marches into one brutal expedition after another. He cuts down countless enemies without end. Every order the Empire gives, he carries out without fail. 3 years disappear in what feels like a single moment. Then 5 years pass, soaked in endless bloodshed. 10 long years slip away as he battles overwhelming demonic forces. He sacrifices his youth to finally bring down the Demon King of Valor. At last, he wonders if his nightmare is finally over. Every single night, he dreamed of returning home, but that fragile hope is shattered in an instant. The old man calmly reveals another mission awaits him. The protagonist explodes in anger, reminding them that this was never the deal. without the slightest guilt. The old man claims saving the empire requires far more than killing the Demon King. He points toward those who still oppose the empire's rule. According to him, no rebels can be allowed to survive. He tells the protagonist only one final enemy remains, a wanted poster reveals. The target is the blonde knight Sir Betrayal. The old man promises that true freedom will come once this last mission is complete. Once again, they manipulate him into fighting for them. The glowing chains tighten around his neck. As his anger reaches its limit, he realizes a chained dog is never allowed to choose its own path. Grinding his teeth, he silently curses the people who enslaved him. Deep inside, he wonders when this endless nightmare will finally come to an end. Suddenly, massive explosions rip through the walls of the Teutonian Night Kingdom. Amid the ruined battlefield, the protagonist grabs the blonde knight by the collar. The knight calls him a fool for blindly following the Empire's orders. With regret in his eyes, the protagonist apologizes to Sir Betrayal. Betrayal immediately recognizes him as the legendary otherworldly hero Han Sung. He tells Han Sung not to apologize because the Empire will eventually abandon him as well. Believing everything is finally over, Han Sung thinks he can finally return home. Then, a sharp blade suddenly pierces his chest from behind. The protagonist freezes, unable to believe what just happened. Standing behind him, Count Brandenburg calmly congratulates the otherworldly hero. The protagonist slowly turns. Recognizing the Empire's Grand General, Brandenburg praises him for serving faithfully as the Empire's loyal hunting dog. He admits the protagonist was nothing more than a useful weapon. In that moment, the protagonist realizes the promise of returning home was nothing but a lie. Deep down, he always knew they would never let him walk away. Even so, he curses the cruel fate that brought him here. As life slowly slips away, with his final breath, he vows to wipe the Empire from existence. That very night, one life comes to an end, while another quietly begins. A baby boy is born into the arms of a joyful duchess. As she gazes at her newborn son, she can't help but feel she has seen the man standing behind her before. Inside the infant's body, the protagonist suddenly remembers exactly who that man is. He instantly recognizes Duke Saxon, the continent's greatest necromancer and black mage. He quickly realizes he has been reborn in Necropolis, the Empire's forbidden land of dark magic. The Stone of Reincarnation, the secret trump card he hid away, has finally activated. The chains that bound him have finally been broken. Although fate chose his new body, he has been reborn into the prestigious Saxon ducal family. For the first time, he has been born with wealth, power, and influence. This time, he vows to master necromancy and destroy every last bastard in the Empire. The nanny suddenly notices the newborn isn't crying. His mother gently points out that although he's breathing normally, he remains completely silent. Concerned, she asks the nanny to examine him more closely. The protagonist simply stares back, with his bright blue eyes. Inside his mind, he reminds himself that he isn't really a child. After everything he's endured, tears no longer come so easily. The nanny checks him carefully and confirms that his breathing is perfectly normal. His father wonders aloud if a baby who doesn't cry is an ill omen. The nanny casually suggests giving him a light smack until he cries. Before he can react, she spanks the baby. The protagonist is completely dumbfounded by the sudden humiliation. Inside, he curses endlessly. His father chuckles, commenting on how stubborn the child already is. His mother gently lifts him into her warm embrace. The protagonist screams inside his head, insisting there's absolutely nothing wrong with him. His mother continues looking at him, her eyes filled with concern. Once again, he silently curses the ridiculous situation. Then, she gently holds him close. Wearing the kindest smile, the baby stays quiet for just a moment. Then, the warmth of a gentle hand brushes against his skin. In that instant, memories from his previous life come rushing back. He remembers the endless battles, the bloodshed, and the countless lives he took. He wonders, when was the last time he ever felt something so warm? Now, the trembling hands of his new mother gently hold him close. She says nothing, simply embracing him with all her love. For the first time in years, he feels a warmth he had long forgotten. It was a love he had never known during all those years of war. Ever since he was old enough to understand the world, he had never shed another tear. But now, his parents watch in stunned silence. Tears begin welling up in the eyes of the newborn child. Before anyone realizes it, he bursts into tears. No matter how hard he tries, he simply can't hold them back. For the first time in what feels like forever, he allows himself to cry. 8 years have passed since the protagonist was reborn into this world. His parents can't help but reflect on how quickly the years have flown by. The mother wonders if he's still in the study room. His father smiles, pointing out that the boy hasn't put down a book since he was 4. She laughs, believing he takes after his father. The Duke nods, realizing his son has developed a deep fascination with magic. His wife gently reminds him of the promise he made long ago. The Duke sighs, remembering his vow never to teach the boy necromancy. Meanwhile, the protagonist sits alone, surrounded by towering stacks of books. The mother asks again if he still remembers that promise. The Duke reassures her that he hasn't forgotten. With a mysterious smile, he hints that tomorrow's birthday gift will be something truly special. Suddenly, frantic knocking echoes through the bedroom door. A terrified maid struggles to catch her breath. As she addresses the Duke, she cries out that something has happened to the young master. The parents freeze, their faces turning pale with shock. Without wasting another second, they rush out in a panic. They burst into the room, desperately calling out his name. There they find the protagonist, kneeling on the floor as blue mana swirls wildly around him. He slowly looks up and calmly calls out to his parents. His mother rushes to his side, overcome with fear. She frantically checks his body, terrified that he might be hurt. The protagonist calmly assures her that he's perfectly fine. His father immediately senses an overwhelming surge of mana filling the room. He stares in disbelief, unable to believe an 8-year-old could release such power. His mother continues holding him close. While he struggles to remain composed, the Duke looks straight at him and asks if he was the one who released that mana. The protagonist immediately realizes his father noticed the anomaly without hesitation. Inside, he curses himself for awakening his mana far too early. Under his father's piercing gaze, he nervously stammers for an answer. He knows one wrong response could expose everything. Then unexpectedly, the Duke breaks into a proud smile. He gently pats the protagonist's head with a look of pure admiration, with a hint of regret. He admits he can never personally teach his son necromancy. The protagonist panics inside, fearing his chance for revenge is slipping away. His mother tells the servants to clean the room before sending him back to rest. The protagonist forces a cheerful smile and quietly obeys, book in hand. He walks away while his parents silently watch him. The Duke turns toward his wife, that he has finally decided on the perfect birthday gift. Before long, the scene shifts to the grand birthday banquet. Nobles from across the dukedom gather to celebrate the young master's birthday. The guests marvel at the incredible turnout filling the grand hall. Everyone eagerly waits for the birthday boy to make his appearance. Meanwhile, the protagonist sits alone on the second floor, looking completely exhausted. He feels drained by the endless crowd celebrating his birthday. Even after 8 years, being treated like true nobility still feels unfamiliar. Letting out a quiet sigh, he leans back in his chair. His thoughts drift back to the day he accidentally destroyed his desk. Simply recalling the memories of his previous life had caused his mana to spiral out of control. Looking down at the book in his hands, he quietly vows to make full use of this body's talent and master the art of necromancy. The protagonist quietly hides behind the door, wondering how he can convince his father. He considers asking to learn necromancy instead of accepting the birthday gift already prepared for him, but after a moment, he quickly gives up on the idea. Just then, his mother arrives with a mysterious hooded figure. The protagonist greets his mother with a warm smile. She happily wishes him a happy 8th birthday. His eyes immediately drift to the stranger standing behind her. His mother gently encourages him to greet their guest. The hooded figure lowers her hood, revealing her face. She is introduced as an elder of the Blue Magic Tower and a master of water magic, the enlightened demon Sephia. His mother announces that Sephia will be his new teacher. The protagonist can only stare, completely stunned by the unexpected news. Sephia smiles warmly, saying she's looking forward to teaching him. The protagonist realizes he has become the disciple of a Blue Magic Tower elder. He quickly understands his training will focus entirely on defensive water magic. It also becomes clear that his mother is doing everything she can to keep him away from dark magic. Sephia politely asks if she can speak with him in private. The protagonist agrees and follows her away from the banquet. Moments later, the two stand together in a vast snowy field. Sephia confirms that she was instructed to teach him nothing but water magic. Then she asks if he's disappointed because she can sense what he truly wants. The protagonist is caught completely off guard that she can read his intentions, unable to hide his curiosity. He asks how she knew, with a gentle smile. Sephia correctly guesses that he wants to learn his father's necromancy. She explains that the conditions behind his parents' marriage are well known throughout the Empire. His mind drifts back to the day Duke Noir courted Lady Alina. At first, she feared his terrifying reputation. To ease her worries, the Duke promised never to pass his dark arts onto their child. Their wedding became a grand celebration, witnessed by elders dressed in pure white. Because of that promise, learning necromancy has become nearly impossible for him. Still, Sephia assures him she'll eventually persuade Lady Alina. She then asks if he's willing to trust her guidance. The protagonist hesitates, wondering if an elf devoted to nature would despise necromancy. He points out that raising the dead goes against the natural order. Sephia lets out a soft laugh, finding his concern surprisingly amusing. She compares necromancy to priests who bring dying people back from the brink of death. The protagonist pauses, completely caught off guard by her answer. To Sephia, necromancy and resurrection are no different from one another. The protagonist quickly realizes she's far more open-minded than most elves. at that moment. Besides, she might actually become the perfect master. Without wasting any time, Sefia begins his first lesson. She reveals that she already knows he has formed the beginnings of a mana circle. His first goal is to complete the first circle. The protagonist can't hide his excitement. Since most magic requires at least a first circle to cast, Sefia instructs him to place a hand over his heart and concentrate. The protagonist quietly closes his eyes, following every instruction. He reflects that this world is completely different from Earth. Unlike Earth, this world overflows with mana. Only ancient beings like dragons can withstand raw mana directly. Humans require a filter to safely control it. That filter is known as the mana heart circle. The protagonist gathers the scattered fragments of mana around his heart. One by one, he pulls the fragments together, forcing them into a steady rotation. He understands that creating a mana circle is like engraving a permanent path inside the heart. Brilliant blue mana suddenly erupts, surrounding his entire body. Sefia calmly tells him to keep rotating the mana around his heart. She explains that completing the process usually takes an entire month. The protagonist silently nods while continuing to concentrate. Then, he opens his hand, resting in his palm. Is a perfectly completed blue mana circle. Sefia's eyes widen in complete disbelief. He accomplished, in only a few minutes, what normally takes months. For the first time, she begins to wonder if he's a true genius. Blue mana continues swirling around the young boy. Sefia asks if he can release mana through his newly completed circle. The protagonist closes his eyes, preparing to push the mana outward. Even that alone is considered impossible for ordinary beginners. His thoughts return to his previous life. Back then, he could only use basic destruction magic, but this body naturally accepts mana, thanks to his father's extraordinary talent. A determined look fills his eyes as he thinks beyond simple water magic. He focuses deeply, gathering raw mana into his fingertips. Slowly, he compresses the energy until it begins to crystallize. He carefully shapes it into a razor-sharp weapon capable of piercing the Empire itself. For a brief moment, his past and present selves seem to overlap. Then, a brilliant shard of pure ice forms in his hand. Sefia watches in stunned silence as the mana stabilizes instead of collapsing. Immediately realizes he has successfully created a flawless ice bolt. On his very first attempt, the protagonist quietly worries that he focused too much on precision instead of power. Without hesitation, he throws the crystallized ice bolt across the snowy field. The projectile tears through the air with unbelievable speed. An enormous explosion erupts. The moment it strikes a giant tree, the massive trunk explodes. Sefia stands frozen as the thunderous impact echoes throughout the forest. She stares at the shattered tree, unable to believe what she's witnessing. Its precision, its sharpness, everything far surpasses what any normal 8-year-old could achieve. The cold wind brushes past as she quietly wonders who her student truly is, standing proudly in the snow. The protagonist simply smiles and gives her a cheerful wave. Sefia kneels beside the shattered tree, carefully examining the lingering traces of magic. She quickly realizes the ice element was absorbed perfectly during the mana release. Although the spell itself was simple, the control over the cold element was nearly flawless. She quietly marvels at the complexity of the magic formula. Every rotation, every acceleration, and every flow connected in perfect harmony. The spell naturally followed the 3 formulas known as the golden ratio of military magic. She can hardly believe he created such a deadly spell without even realizing it. The protagonist nervously asks if he did something wrong. Sefia simply stares at him without saying a word. After a brief pause, she calmly replies that it's nothing. With a quiet smile, she finally understands why the Duke would feel conflicted. Before long, later, Sefia sits down with the Duke for a private conversation. The Duke immediately asks why she believes she can no longer teach his son. He argues that reaching the first circle within minutes deserves even greater instruction. Sefia explains that the protagonist's very first spell was already a perfectly lethal attack. The Duke's expression stiffens, in complete disbelief. She continues, explaining that every military magic formula was executed in the perfect golden ratio. Without hesitation, Sefia declares that the boy possesses a natural talent for killing. The Duke falls silent, clearly troubled by her conclusion. He asks if she's refusing to teach because of her peaceful beliefs. Sefia calmly takes a sip of tea. Before shaking her head, she admits that she simply wants to guide him toward the right path. Elsewhere, the protagonist happily practices while blue mana dances in his hand. The Duke realizes there's no longer any reason to keep the Noir family's magic from him. For the first time, he seriously considers teaching him the secret Noir magic passed down through House Noir. Even the thought leaves the Duke visibly shaken. Sefia quietly points out that the boy already possesses the talent he longs to learn. The Duke remains silent, lost in thought. Sefia then mentions hearing the story of his romance with Alina. She says she truly respects the promise he made to his wife, but gently reminds him that such a promise shouldn't decide the child's entire future. A gift that extraordinary should never be wasted. Outside the room, the protagonist secretly listens through the door. After a while, he realizes he can't hear a single word. He assumes they're probably discussing him. His thoughts return to the overwhelming power of his very first spell. He remembers. Shocked, even Sephia looked. From now on, he resolves to control his strength much more carefully. Letting out a quiet sigh, he leans against the wall. Just then, someone suddenly calls his name. He looks up and instantly recognizes the familiar face. With a bright smile, he happily greets Uncle Helmut. Helmut waves back, greeting the young lord with his usual warmth. Cure. The protagonist asks what brought him here. Helmut laughs, asking where the young master has been hiding. He explains that he has been away carrying out his duty to protect the ducal family. With a hearty laugh, Helmut lifts the protagonist high into the air. The protagonist quickly realizes Helmut has spent all this time fighting inside dangerous dungeons, even after the Demon King's defeat. This world continues to suffer from endless dungeon outbreaks. Since that era, countless civilian lands have been devastated by monsters. Knights devote their lives to clearing unexplored dungeons and stopping dungeon breaks before disaster strikes. Among every territory, the Duchy of Sachsen bears the heaviest burden. Ironically, that burden exists because of the protagonist's own actions in his previous life. As the otherworldly hero, he defeated the Demon King. After the war, Duke Sachsen was ordered by the Empire to clean up every remaining monster within the Demon King's territory. In other words, the Empire dumped the most dangerous aftermath of the war onto this single duchy. The protagonist sincerely tells Helmut to stay safe. Helmut smiles warmly, touched by the young lord's concern. Just then, Duke enters the room. Helmut immediately bows, greeting his lord with respect. The Duke praises him for his hard work during the recent dungeon raid. Noticing everyone gathered, the protagonist wonders why his mother has suddenly arrived. Unable to contain herself, she rushes over and pulls him into a proud embrace. The Duke also offers his heartfelt congratulations. His mother tells him that he may ask for any reward he wishes. For a moment, the protagonist considers asking to learn necromancy, but worried it would sound far too suspicious, he quickly changes his mind, trying his best to act like an ordinary child. He blurts out that he wants a little sister. The room instantly falls silent, as both parents freeze in embarrassment, flustered beyond words. The Duke awkwardly promises he'll do his best. Helmut struggles to contain his laughter until the Duke glares at him and tells him to stop. Later that night, the protagonist collapses into bed, exhausted from pretending to be a child and practicing magic. But as he sleeps, a terrible nightmare begins. A familiar, hateful voice echoes through the darkness. Count Brandenburg appears, mocking him for growing soft in the comfort of his new family. He sneers, asking if the protagonist has already forgotten his revenge. Brandenburg warns that the Empire will hunt him down until nothing remains. The protagonist suddenly jolts awake, gasping for air. Blue mana erupts wildly, surrounding his entire body. He immediately realizes he's suffering a dangerous mana rampage. Grinding his teeth, he curses the Empire as violent mana surges around him. He rushes into the snowy night, hoping the cold air will calm the raging power. Instead, the mana grows even more violent, forcing him to clutch his chest in agony. Then, Sephia quietly steps out from the shadows. She calmly remarks that he seems to be in quite a difficult situation, recognizing the symptoms. She identifies it as a mana rampage and quietly praises his extraordinary talent. At the same time, she senses an unsettling darkness hidden within his magic. She warns that once hatred completely consumes his mana, there will be no turning back. Moments later, the raging mana finally begins to settle. Sephia gently calls his name, and he weakly answers. She explains that magic is nothing more than a reflection of one's heart. Then she quietly reveals that his greatest talent lies in taking the lives of others, calling it both an extraordinary gift and a dangerous curse. She holds out a blue-covered book. She smiles, saying he's fortunate that she's the one guiding him. The protagonist stares in disbelief. Realizing the book is a tome on necromancy, Sephia smiles warmly, saying perhaps fate brought them together after all. Then she softly wishes him a happy birthday. Overcome with emotion, the protagonist rushes forward and hugs his teacher. Sephia gently pats his head, teasing him for becoming so attached. Few days later, the protagonist stands beside his master on the snow-covered northern gate plains. His eyes soon fall on a white rabbit quietly resting in the snow. Sephia calmly tells him to remember the hunting lessons he learned from his father. Without hesitation, he fires a concentrated ice bolt straight at the rabbit. The spell pierces its target. With flawless precision, a burst of blue mana erupts, sending a powerful shockwave across the snowy field. Sephia silently observes, noticing that his hands never tremble after taking a life. She explains that every mage shapes magic differently. No two spells are ever exactly the same. Then she asks if he knows why that is. The protagonist quietly admits that he doesn't. Sephia smiles, explaining that magic is ultimately a reflection of the heart. Mana simply gives form to whatever lies within one's mind. Because of that, every spell reveals the landscape of its caster's soul. the protagonist quietly absorbs every word she says. Sefia continues, explaining that names like Firewall are only tools to help mages visualize their spells. They exist to turn imagination into reality. Even the magic taught by the great magic towers follows this very principle. The red magic tower believes strength creates order, giving birth to destructive flames. The blue magic tower believes harmony creates order, allowing water to flow without resistance. Every tower's philosophy becomes the very foundation of its magic. She casually mentions the noir, white, and green magic towers as well. Then she smiles, deciding the rest can wait until he's older. The lesson soon shifts to the most basic form of necromancy, raising the dead. The protagonist stands over the rabbit he just killed. Dark purple mana slowly begins whirling around the lifeless body. Necromancy works by controlling a corpse with invisible mana strings. The protagonist slowly extends his fingers, carefully manipulating the unseen threads. He connects them to the rabbit's head, spine, and knees, one by one. The mana strings bind themselves to each joint. Suddenly, the rabbit's eyes glow a sinister red as the corpse rises once again. Sefia smiles, praising his flawless execution. She immediately asks if he's ready for the next lesson. The protagonist answers without the slightest hesitation. A glowing blue magic circle forms as he casts frozen armor. His eyes shine brightly, overflowing with concentration. Ice rapidly spreads around the undead rabbit. Within seconds, jagged armor completely covers its body. The tiny zombie rabbit now stands, wrapped in solid ice. Sefia nods, complimenting both the spell's form and execution. Then, she decides to test its durability. The protagonist watches carefully as she prepares her own attack. A sharp beam of ice magic shoots toward the frozen rabbit. The spell crashes against the icy armor. To his surprise, the armor remains completely intact, unable to hide his excitement. He celebrates blocking his master's attack. Sefia smiles, praising his excellent work. Then she notices he still has something on his mind. The protagonist eagerly admits that he has one request. Taking a deep breath, he finally speaks. He asks if she can also teach him how to properly master water magic. Sefia smiles knowingly, already expecting the question. Then, she calmly refuses. The answer leaves him completely speechless. She explains that everything he performed today was still only the most basic level of water magic, like every magical attribute. Water grows more complex with deeper understanding. Most mages struggle to master even a single element. Using two attributes at once is something only dual mages can accomplish. At his age, such a feat should be nearly impossible. To her, his request sounds like nothing more than childish ambition. The protagonist blinks, unable to believe what he just heard. He asks if she truly meant that. The word ambition echoes in his mind. He remembers everything he accomplished today. Was all of that still not enough? He reminds Sefia that she promised they would find a way together. For the first time, she hesitates, caught completely off guard. She awkwardly declares that today's lesson is over. Late that night, the protagonist quietly enters the massive library. With determined eyes, he pulls a thick book from the shelf. Kneeling on the floor, he vows to prove his worth. Dark purple mana surrounds him as he studies through the night, completely immersed in magical research. The following day, Sefia repeatedly calls out his name in the snowy forest. She finally finds him. She notices the exhaustion written across his face. The protagonist simply smiles, explaining that he stayed up preparing something. Sefia gently warns him not to push himself too hard. He quietly nods. For summoning a glowing purple magic circle, she immediately praises him for completely mastering yesterday's spell. Then, the protagonist raises both hands. Blue mana gathers in one, while dark purple mana gathers in the other. Without warning, the ice armor surrounding the zombie rabbit suddenly detonates. Sefia's eyes widen as the unexpected explosion shakes the battlefield. The rabbit's corpse begins, overflowing with unstable dark mana. An enormous explosion erupts. From the undead body, ice shards and dark energy explode outward in every direction. Reacting instantly, Sefia raises a massive hexagonal barrier to block the blast. Silence falls as the smoke slowly clears. The protagonist calmly explains that he combined corpse explosion with ice explosion. By merging both the water and dark attributes, he created an entirely new spell. With a confident smile, he looks at his master and asks, "Does this finally make me a dual mage?" Ice and bone fragments explode across the snowy field like deadly shrapnel. Sefia stares at the destruction in complete disbelief. She realizes she has never witnessed a spell like this before. The frozen armor amplified the corpse explosion into a devastating attack that covered a massive area. She picks up one of the shattered ice fragments and studies it carefully. It becomes clear that this magic was created for one purpose: to kill. It feels like the work of someone who spent an entire lifetime on the battlefield. She quietly wonders what kind of mind could create such a terrifying spell. The protagonist notices her gaze and looks back at her. Just then, he spots Uncle Helmut riding toward them. Helmut waves cheerfully from atop his armored horse. The protagonist asks if he has just returned from another dungeon raid. Helmut smiles and confirms they finished subduing a small group of monsters. Behind him stands the Black Cavalry, the unrivaled horsemen of the dukedom. They carry aura-covered lances and follow the command of Captain Helmut. Helmut is also one of the 7 swordmasters of the continent. The protagonist smiles and reminds Helmut about his promise to teach him swordsmanship. To him, this is the perfect chance to learn from a true master. Helmut laughs and promises he has not forgotten. The protagonist waves goodbye while Helmut reminds him to stay warm. Sefia tells the protagonist it is time to return. That night, Sefia meets with the Duke and Duchess to report his progress. She reveals that the protagonist has already mastered the first circle of both water magic and necromancy. The Duke reminds her that they only asked her to teach water magic. Sefia admits that she knows, but insists on teaching him the magic he truly desires. She explains that the protagonist wants to master more than just water magic. She respectfully asks for permission to continue teaching him. Although the Duchess looks worried, Sefia assures them she will guide him safely after receiving their approval. Sefia leaves with quiet confidence. Before leaving, she sincerely apologizes to the Duke for breaking her promise. The Duchess smiles proudly, amazed that their son has already become a dual mage at only 8 years old. The Duke lets out a nervous sigh, but admits their son is truly gifted. He tells his wife that he wants to personally teach the protagonist necromancy, so he can prepare him to become the next lord. He imagines the boy one day standing proudly as his successor. The Duke lowers his head and apologizes for breaking the promise they once made. The Duchess quietly admits that people still fear necromancy as the magic of death. The Duke firmly declares that he will train their son until he becomes strong enough to ignore those shallow opinions. The Duchess embraces her husband and gives him her blessing. The Duke holds her close and vows to raise their son into the greatest mage possible. Soon after, the protagonist begins his first official lesson in advanced necromancy. The Duke immediately expresses his disappointment, saying the protagonist has been reviving the dead without truly understanding them. The protagonist silently argues with himself, knowing his previous teacher only taught him the basics. They stand inside the vast underground magic workshop beneath House Noir. The Duke strictly forbids him from using such crude necromancy during his lessons. Instead, he orders the protagonist to memorize every bone, muscle, and organ of every living creature. The Duke asks if he understands the importance of this lesson. The protagonist respectfully accepts every instruction. Days pass as he buries himself beneath towering stacks of advanced medical books. After memorizing every page, the Duke finally declares that the basics are complete. At last, the protagonist is allowed to begin practical training. The Duke announces that the real lesson starts now. The protagonist eagerly nods and prepares himself. The Duke reveals the corpse of a goblin lying on the table. The protagonist stares at it in confusion. Seeing his reaction, the Duke begins to explain. An ordinary warlock can only create mindless zombies, but a true master creates death knights. He points toward the goblin and tells the protagonist to demonstrate what he has learned, without hesitation. Protagonist raises his hand as dark purple mana begins swirling around him. He quickly realizes that controlling a goblin is far more difficult than controlling a rabbit. Its human-like body requires much more precise control. Dozens of mana strings shoot forward and connect to every limb. The goblin corpse jerks violently as the strings take hold. The protagonist struggles to keep control of the complicated body. He begins to wonder if hardening the corpse was a mistake. Its joints and muscles become so stiff that it can barely move. Sweat runs down his face as he searches for a solution. His father gently places a hand on his shoulder. He praises the idea of strengthening the body for defense, but he explains that doing so also limits the corpse's movement. The Duke tells him to watch carefully. His eyes begin glowing with deep purple mana. Dark energy surrounds the goblin corpse. Moments later, the stiff body begins moving with unnatural grace. The protagonist watches in complete amazement. His father explains that the rib cage exists only to protect living organs. Purple mana pulses inside the empty chest. Then he asks if the dead have any organs left to protect. The rib cage suddenly expands outward and transforms into razor-sharp bone blades. The creature now wields deadly blades grown from its own body. The Duke explains that true necromancy begins with understanding a body's structure, then reshaping it however you desire. A faint smile appears on his face as he watches his son learn. The protagonist finally realizes how deep the art of necromancy truly is. The Duke declares that this is the true foundation of noir magic. The protagonist stares at the terrifying creation in awe, looking back at his father. His respect grows even deeper. The protagonist asks his father to teach him the true philosophy of the noir magic tower. A subtle smile appears on the Duke's face. He asks if his son truly wishes to know the absolute truth. The Duke slowly kneels before him. He reveals that the truth can always be found within death. He places a hand on his son's shoulder and explains that only by understanding the weight of life can they reach the truth. At that moment, A painful memory from his previous life flashes before his eyes. Heavy footsteps echo across a battlefield consumed by flames. A defeated enemy kneels before the hero and begs for mercy. The protagonist stands silently over the wounded man. He slowly raises his bloodstained sword. The enemy desperately pleads for his life. The sword falls, and the battlefield becomes silent. The protagonist suddenly returns to reality, visibly shaken. His father notices the change and asks if he is all right. The Duke studies his son's face with concern. The protagonist remains silent as the memories refuse to fade. After a long pause, he quietly says that he is fine. Behind him, the ghost of his former self walks through an endless sea of blood. He repeats once again that he is fine. He stands firm and insists that he is completely fine, without saying another word. As the protagonist's training continues, news of Duke Satchin teaching him dark magic spreads across the Empire. The Duke's decision to break his long-standing vow sends shockwaves throughout the entire Empire. The one at the center of all the attention is none other than the young protagonist. From powerful nobles to influential families, everyone has their eyes on him. A few weeks later, the protagonist stands at the dukedom's training ground sparring with Helmut. Their wooden swords collide, sending sparks flying with every clash. Helmut smiles, swinging his blade with overwhelming strength. The protagonist calmly slips past each attack, refusing to lose his footing. He raises his wooden sword, barely blocking another heavy strike. The force sends him sliding backward, but he lands firmly on his feet. Helmut looks at the young boy in genuine surprise. He lets out a laugh, admitting the young master is far more skilled than expected. The protagonist breathes heavily, but his eyes never leave Helmut. He quickly realizes that a knight like Helmut would never lose his sword so easily. He accuses Helmut of deliberately holding back. Helmut immediately denies it, saying an ordinary opponent would have already fallen to those techniques. He praises the protagonist's swordsmanship, while admitting it is a shame that he chose the path of a mage. After all, escort knights exist to protect mages on the battlefield. In his eyes, there is no need for the young lord to push himself this hard. Curious, Helmut asks why he trains with such determination. The protagonist answers without hesitation, saying there is a very good reason. He says it would never suit the Duke's son to hide behind guards and defensive magic alone. Deep inside, he knows he cannot waste the chance to learn from one of the 7 swordmasters. Helmut bursts into laughter, calling it a magnificent answer. He proudly says that if he had a son like the protagonist, he would have no regrets in life. The protagonist quietly celebrates, having earned praise from one of the continent's greatest swordsmen. Just then, his mother arrives at the training grounds. She smiles, saying both of them seem to be enjoying themselves. The protagonist happily greets his mother. He asks what brought her out into the cold. She replies that she wanted to see how hard her son has been working. Then she reveals she has some important news. The protagonist grows curious, wondering what it could be. She asks if he remembers the birthday wish he made long ago. The protagonist pauses, trying to remember. Then it suddenly comes back to him. He asked for little sister. The memory of his embarrassed parents flashes through his mind. His mother smiles warmly and tells him he will soon have a younger sister to protect. The protagonist's face lights up, as he happily agrees without hesitation. 10 months later, the entire family gathers around the newborn baby. The protagonist quietly gazes at the sleeping infant. He cannot hide his amazement at how incredibly small and adorable she is. It still feels unreal that this tiny baby is truly his little sister. His mother gently asks if he would like to hold her. Although surprised, he carefully accepts the baby into his arms. To his surprise, holding her feels much easier than he expected. His mother smiles, saying the baby looks comfortable in her brother's arms. The Duke quietly remarks that she feels as light as a feather. The protagonist softly disagrees, saying she feels surprisingly heavy. His father gently explains that this is the true weight of a life. Ian tells him never to forget it. The Duke reminds him that today's lesson is about to begin. The protagonist makes his way to the snow-covered training grounds where Master Sephia is already waiting. Without wasting any time, Sephia announces that today's lesson will be real combat. The protagonist asks if he can fight without holding back. Sephia gives a confident smile, telling him to use every ounce of his strength. Without hesitation, the protagonist summons an intricate magic circle. A massive wave of ice surges toward Sephia. She calmly watches the attack approach, eager to see how much her student has grown. With effortless precision, she deflects the spell and calls it far too slow, holding a razor-sharp shard of ice. Sephia asks if a student should ever show mercy to his own master. The protagonist stands his ground, sweat slowly running down his face. Sephia unleashes another devastating strike, ordering him to raise a barrier immediately. He reacts without hesitation, thrusting both hands forward. A massive hexagonal ice barrier appears just in time, blocking the full force of the attack. As he catches his breath, he realizes he would have suffered serious injuries without that instant defense. Sephia smiles with satisfaction, praising his ability to create such a sturdy barrier in a split second. The protagonist rises to his feet, shaking away the shattered ice. Cephia tells him to attack again. With everything he has, the protagonist gathers his mana, carefully restructuring countless layers of ice. A towering wall of solid blue ice erupts from the frozen ground. Cephia watches with surprise as the enormous wall suddenly blocks the battlefield. She immediately studies its structure, realizing he greatly increased its mana density. Confused, she wonders why he would create a purely defensive spell in the middle of a fight. She assumes he simply needs time to recover. Then, cracks begin spreading across the massive wall. An intense blue light bursts from within the ice. The protagonist's eyes shine with deadly determination. As he activates the hidden trap, he forces the overloaded mana inside the wall to explode. The entire ice wall erupts, releasing a catastrophic wave of frozen destruction. For the first time, Cephia's eyes widen in complete shock. She realizes far too late that the wall was never meant to defend. It was a gigantic magical bomb from the very beginning. A devastating explosion swallows everything as countless shards of ice tear through the battlefield. The explosion clears and the protagonist celebrates his success. He explains how he condensed the ice wall molecules and detonated them like a grenade. He calls out to his master but sees her frozen and injured in the ice. He panics and screams her name. The real Master Cephia appears behind him unharmed. He realizes the injured figure was just an illusion. Cephia compliments his impressive technique. She admits she never thought a mere first circle mage could wound an elder of the magic tower. A small cut is visible on her cheek. The protagonist apologizes for hurting her. Cephia says she is actually grateful for the wound. She explains it means he trusted her enough to use his full strength without holding back. She kneels down and says that makes her prouder than words can express. She pats his head and asks how he came up with such a formula. He credits her teaching. Cephia looks at him with a complex expression. Later in the Duke's office, the Duke asks about the wound on Cephia's cheek. She explains she was careless while teaching the young master and his formula was sharp. The Duke expresses his gratitude to Cephia. Cephia says teaching such a talented student is a joy. She then reports that a group of orcs has crossed the mountain range into their territory. She notes that a small cavalry squad could handle it. However, the Duke declares his intention to send the protagonist into this battle. Cephia objects, saying the protagonist isn't ready yet. The Duke clarifies he won't be on the front lines. He insists that defending the territory is the duty of House Saxon and the heir must understand that responsibility. The Duke states the protagonist is no exception. Cephia asks what she needs to do. The Duke reveals he will entrust the protagonist with his artifact. He asks Cephia to guide the protagonist until he learns to control its power. An artifact is an object imbued with immense power and will that demands mana or life as payment. The stronger the artifact, the more dangerous and uncontrollable it becomes to the point of fatality. The House of Saxon has long mastered the art of handling such deadly powers. The Duke leads the group to the vault and declares the protagonist must prepare for the upcoming battle. The protagonist realizes he is finally going to a real battle and feels a surge of excitement. Master Cephia confirms he will join the subjugation force to exterminate the orc horde. The Duke holds up a golden key and states the protagonist must first learn to control the power of darkness. They enter a vast vault filled with glowing Demon King artifacts conquered by their ancestors. The Duke warns that these items contain immense power and must never be touched recklessly. The protagonist feels the intense mana radiating from the dangerous collection. The Duke turns around only to find the protagonist has already wandered off into the vault. The protagonist searches the aisles for an artifact that perfectly suits his needs. Dark artifacts whisper to him, sensing his hatred and desire for revenge. They beg him to choose them and kill his enemies together to reach new heights. The artifacts resonate with his lingering resentment, but he knows they are not strong enough. He spots a mysterious shadowy cloak hidden away and approaches it with curiosity. He recognizes it as a shadow cloak used by Duke Berta of the Demon King's army. He recalls that it could give form to shadows and make the user an incredibly difficult opponent. He decides to try it on immediately without hesitation. The Duke and Cephia scream his name as dark energy begins to swirl violently around him. The cloak activates and a hungry voice demands to be fed. The shadows begin to move like living things as the true nature of the artifact reveals itself. The narration explains that to truly control it, the host must make the shadow creature. The protagonist understands that he must make the shadow creature completely submit to his will. A massive shadow monster looms over him and refuses to yield easily. He stares into the darkness with intense focus and determination. A swirling vortex of dark energy consumes the room as the adults watch in shock. Cephia asks if they should be worried after waiting for so long. The Duke warns that if this continues, the protagonist will lose his sanity and be devoured. Cephia panics, but the Duke decides they must pull him out by force. They prepare to intervene as the dark energy rages on. Suddenly the energy clears and the protagonist stands there unharmed wearing the cloak. Cephia rushes to him and asks if he is all right. He smiles and claims he is fine, saying it only stung a little. Adults stare in disbelief at how he remained unscathed. They question how a child could endure such a powerful and dangerous artifact. The protagonist turns to his father with a bright and eager expression. The Duke tells him to speak his mind. He asks if he can try on the other artifacts as well. The adults are left completely speechless by his shocking request. The Duke sighs and reluctantly gives him permission to go ahead. The protagonist cheers and thanks him profusely. And so begins the protagonist's exploration of the Saxon family artifact vault, which lasts all day and night. Before we continue, if you're enjoying the video, please take a moment to hit the like button and subscribe. Your support means a lot and helps me keep bringing you more awesome manware recaps. Every like, comment, and subscription motivates me to create even more videos for you. Thank you, and let's jump back into the story. Helmut stares in shock at the dark cloak draped over the protagonist. Recognizing it instantly as the legendary shadow cloak, the protagonist confirms it is real, and Helmut warns him about the extreme difficulty of controlling such a dangerous artifact. Waving off the warning, the protagonist claims it feels like nothing more than a prickling sensation. Helmut finds his nonchalant reaction fascinating, grinning. The protagonist jokes that the artifact was simply lonely and wanted a friend. As a small shadow creature with sharp teeth appears at his feet, Helmut bursts into laughter at the absurdity of calling a deadly artifact lonely. While the shadow creature snaps its jaws in annoyance, thanking Helmut for his kindness, the protagonist suddenly requests a real sparring match for combat practice. Stunned by the bold request, Helmut quickly agrees with enthusiasm and draws his sword, ready to fight. The protagonist feels the intimidating aura of a swordmaster, but Helmut reassures him he will use only basic swordsmanship. Without aura, it becomes clear Helmut intends to go easy on him for the sake of the duel. The protagonist reveals his true goal: to test the Shadow Cloak offensive capabilities. Summoning dark tendrils for a Shadow Blade rush, Helmut blocks the Shadow Blades with pure strength, and the protagonist marvels at the power behind the block. Laughing, Helmut launches a fierce counterattack. The protagonist dodges and uses the cloak to raise defensive spikes from the ground. Fascinated by the surprise attack emerging from the shadows, Helmut readies himself for the next strike. Helmut brings his sword down with immense force. The protagonist blocks it with a solid shadow construct. The shadow weapon held firm against a strike meant to shatter ordinary steel. In that moment, the protagonist understands the true difference between a regular weapon and a top-tier artifact. Demanding 10 more exchanges, Helmut presses on. While the watching knights murmur in disbelief at the young master's unexpected endurance, an indescribable wall now stands between the knights and Dale. A few days later, on the day of deployment, the mother tries to stop her son. She says she will speak to his father again. She cannot let him go to such a dangerous place. Dale reassures her that his father and Uncle Helmut will be there. Worry fills her face. Cannot bear the thought of him getting hurt. Dale explains he needs to become stronger, to bear the weight of the dukedom. He needs the strength to protect his mother, his father, and lies. That is why he needs this experience now. He asks to be allowed to grow strong enough to protect her. Reluctantly, the mother agrees and tells him to go. Dale promises he will be back soon, and rides off at dawn. The troops stand ready for departure at the temporary base. The Duke tells Dale to give the order to march in his stead. Confused, Dale hesitates, but the Duke explains the Black Cavalry will one day be his to command. These are his knights, the Duke says. Dale realizes these are his knights, not Hansungs, and this is his first battle as their leader. Raising his voice, he calls for the proud swords of House Saxon to march forth. The troops cheer for their young master. Dale orders all troops to their positions. 250 cavalrymen and the Winter Wardens now stand against roughly 1,000 orcs. The orcs cross the mountains heading upstream, and will move downstream soon. The plan is to strike first, crossing the lower Saxon River before they arrive. But there is only one way for 250 men to cross a deep river quickly. Just then, Sephia appears and offers to form a bridge of ice. Dale's face lights up at the sight of Master Sephia. He realizes she came all this way to help. Despite everything she has said about nonviolence, with a wave of her hand, she creates a massive ice bridge. They can pass now, she tells them. The Duke thanks her for her aid. Dale says his goodbyes and turns to leave. Sephia watches him go. She cannot help but think it strange that a student could make his master worry this much. The Hidden Ranger unit launches a surprise ambush on the Orc temporary base. A volley of flaming arrows arcs through the dark sky, streaking downward like falling stars. The projectiles find their mark. A massive explosion erupts at the center of the camp. Fire engulfs their tents, and the Orcs scramble in panic. Heavy arrows pierce thick Orc flesh, igniting the battlefield in flame without delay. Helmut signals the cavalry battalions to advance. The Black Cavalry forms a wedge and thunders forward. From the ridge, the protagonist watches the calculated charge unfold. Hooves strike the earth twice every second, closing in at 40 kilometers an hour. The combined weight of riders and armor multiplies the devastating impact. Coldly, the protagonist analyzes the tactical advantage of the formation. 3-meter lances lock into a rigid cull lance formation. Night aura surges through the steel, Piercing what should be impenetrable orc defenses, the orcs cannot block the relentless cavalry assault. The protagonist notes just how one-sided the engagement has become. The Duke confirms this is the pride of their ducal cavalry corps, but Helmut warns the battle has only just begun. The surviving orcs raise heavy shields to withstand the next wave. Lances shatter against the reinforced shield wall. Quickly, Helmut signals an immediate retreat to preserve their momentum. He orders rotating charges to systematically break the enemy formation. A brilliant blue flare marks the tactical withdrawal. The knights pull back swiftly, leaving the orcs confused. Disbelief spreads across the orc ranks as the cavalry suddenly vanishes. Fierce growls echo through the burning camp. Moments later, the cavalry reorganizes and strikes from a new angle. Steel clashes against brutal orc strength in a chaotic melee. One knight falls from his saddle in the brutal exchange. From his elevated position, the protagonist watches the fallen knight in silence, coldly. He labels the casualty an unfortunate but expected loss. Helmut counts the single casualty without hesitation. The protagonist questions their decision to abandon the fallen soldier so quickly. The commander declares the exposed knight already a lost cause. The protagonist demands to know why they refuse to save one of their own. The veterans remain completely silent. The orc lunges forward, its massive blade raised high. In an instant, the protagonist realizes a mounted rescue would arrive too late. He calculates he must pierce the thick orc hide from a distance. Rapidly, he begins restructuring his ice bolt formula for extreme range. A ballistic trajectory equation stabilizes the lethal modification. His blue eye locks onto the target with absolute precision. He names the upgraded spell after a legendary sniper rifle. The deadly projectile aims directly at the advancing orc. A concentrated beam of ice energy shoots forward at supersonic speed. The magical round tears through the battlefield without deviation. The Duke notes the incredible accuracy of the long-range strike. Without hesitation, the protagonist spurs his horse forward toward the battlefield. Helmut shouts in confusion as the boy charges ahead alone. Raising his hand, the Duke orders the knights to let him go. Helmut stares in shock, while the Duke smiles with absolute confidence. The Duke marvels that the protagonist crafted an original magic formula with such destructive power. He realizes the boy's inner world must already be near completion. Ahead, the protagonist's gaze turns cold and calculating. He notices the remaining orcs quickly regrouping under their leader. Two critical problems remain on the battlefield, and he weighs them both nearby. The fallen knight clutches his head in sheer panic after his fall. The protagonist realizes his original spell formula is too long and inefficient for combat. Spinning a new magic circle, he applies mathematical simplification to the spell, riding rapidly toward the fallen knight. He tests a new shortened incantation. He fires the newly created ice bullet directly at the enemy, leaving the knight in disbelief. Stammering, the knight asks why the young master would risk himself to save him. The protagonist dismounts and lands firmly on the ground. He tells the knight not to worry about the past, placing a hand on his chest. He declares that House Saxon never abandons a loyal sword. Looking up in awe, the knight sees a horde of orcs charging from the dark. He screams the protagonist's name as the monsters close in for the kill. Raising his hand, the protagonist summons a massive wave of purple energy. He casts Shadow Blade, sending a horizontal slash of dark energy across the field. The giant purple blades tear through the charging orcs with devastating force. Smiling darkly, the protagonist commands the shadows to consume the enemy. The lead orc freezes in terror, its eyes glowing white with fear. Dark tendrils erupt from the ground and violently wrap around the monsters. The shadows crush and completely devour the screaming orcs into nothingness. The shadow creatures chomp down on the remaining orcs with terrifying hunger. Dark tendrils devour bone and flesh until nothing remains, turning to the fallen knight with a bright smile. The protagonist asks if he is still there. He fires one final, precise ice bullet to end the last threat. The battle is done, he declares, while the knight sits trembling on the ground. The knight calls out to him in disbelief. He admits his legs refuse to move, whether from fear or injury he cannot tell. The protagonist smiles awkwardly at the paralyzed knight, lifting him into his arms. He says they made it out alive. He hands the rescued knight over to Helmut and leaves the rest to him. Helmut roars for the cavalry battalions to launch a full charge. The knights scream for House Saxon as they thunder forward. They charge with renewed vigor, shouting for their young master Dale. Soon after, back at the Saxon base, the mission is declared a success. The Duke sits across from the protagonist, saying he has a question. He demands to know why the protagonist rushed into enemy lines alone. Glaring intensely, he asks why on earth he would do such a thing. He questions the reckless nature of his son's actions. The protagonist gulps nervously under the weight of his father's scrutiny. Sitting in silence, he wonders why he is being scolded for saving a life. The Duke demands an explanation for why the protagonist rushed into enemy lines alone. Calmly, the protagonist justifies his actions, stating he was merely fulfilling the duty of a future leader of House Saxon. The Duke dismisses this reasoning as weak. Confused, the protagonist remembers his father being famous for cherishing his knights. He asks why his father stood by and watched a knight die. The Duke explains that in their territory, facing constant hordes, knights do not fight hoping to be saved. Disappointed, the protagonist admits he had hoped his father would have saved the loyal knight. He asks if his father even tried. The Duke retorts that the protagonist made the knights believe someone would rescue them, instead of thinking and acting to survive on their own. He asks how many knights with that mindset would actually live through the next battle. The Duke explains the knights sharpen their blades to face threats themselves, and he only steps in when they reach their limit. That, he says, is the noble duty their house must bear. Slowly, the protagonist realizes his father is right, a logical truth he once knew in his previous life but had long forgotten. The Duke praises him for acting upon his own will, and tells him never to lose that spirit. Accepting the praise, the protagonist agrees, and they return to the castle together. Soon, the tale of the young ducal heir charging into a horde of orcs to save a single knight spreads across the empire, exaggerated with every retelling. Some now claim he single-handedly cut down 1,000 orcs. The story spreads like wildfire, though the protagonist finds it thoroughly embarrassing. A few days later, at the training grounds, the knights greet the protagonist with honor and excitement. He tries to tell them it is not necessary. Stand proud, Helmut tells him. The knights cheer that they must grow even stronger for the future of young Master Dale. The protagonist smiles at their passion. A maid announces the arrival of guests from House Orhart. Thanking her, Helmut prepares to greet them. The protagonist smiles, anticipating a meeting with someone special. The history of Marshal House Orhart and the fallen Teutonia kingdom comes to light. The Empire's unification war destroyed both the kingdom and the Divine Sword. In the Grand Hall, the Duke and Duchess await their guests. The protagonist confirms he has finished his training. Helmut announces the guests have arrived, and the Duke orders a respectful escort. The heavy doors open, revealing a woman bowing deeply beside a young blonde girl. The protagonist notes she arrived without a single attendant. The woman introduces herself as Vanessa Orhart and greets the Duke. Warmly, the Duke welcomes them both. Vanessa introduces her daughter Charlotte, who looks visibly furious, confused. The protagonist wonders at the girl's hostile demeanor. Suddenly, Charlotte shouts at her mother for bowing to the imperial nobles, stammering in shock. Vanessa struggles to respond to her daughter's outburst. Calmly, the Duke raises a hand to diffuse the tension. He acknowledges the hardship they endured just to arrive here. Turning to the protagonist, he asks him to show Lady Charlotte around the castle. Agreeing, the protagonist extends his hand politely. Charlotte glares furiously, slapping his hand away as she screams at him not to touch her. The protagonist stands there completely bewildered, shocked by the sudden violence. The royal family looks on in silence. With pure hatred, Charlotte calls them shameless imperial nobles. Her mother yells at her to apologize at once. Clicking her tongue, Charlotte turns her back on them. She storms out of the hall and slams the heavy doors shut behind her, bowing deeply. The mother apologizes for her daughter's impudence. She explains that recent events have left the girl emotionally unstable. The Duchess asks quietly what exactly happened to them. The mother reveals that Count Brandenburg, the Empire's holy knight, was assigned to their territory, known as the Pig King. He seeks to force himself upon skilled swordswomen to breed talented heirs. He targets anyone with talent, even underage girls like Charlotte. Charlotte barely escaped his clutches before he could lay a hand on her. Such horror, the mother explains, cannot simply be erased from memory. She wishes to protect her daughter, but her power as a fallen noble is far too limited. She implores the Duke to accept her daughter as a maid of House Saxon. She begs for this sanctuary, so that man may never touch her again. Out at the training grounds, the protagonist finds the girl standing alone. He calls out to Lady Charlotte, but she looks away with a cold expression. He asks if she even knows where she is going. She replies that she does not care. He wonders why of all places she chose to run to the training grounds. He asks if her hand is all right after she slapped him earlier. It is fine, she tells him. Not to worry about it. Quietly, he realizes she is likely still consumed by the trauma she endured. Even if she acts unfriendly, he reminds himself, she is still just a child. Without warning, she draws her sword and challenges him to a match. She commands Dale of House Saxon to draw his blade and face her. Confused by her sudden aggression, the protagonist only stares. He realizes she is simply lashing out however she can in her distress. Ready to fight, Charlotte stands with her rapier raised and demands a match. The protagonist asks for reason first. Plenty of rumors have reached her. Charlotte says she references the incredible man who slaughtered 1,000 orcs alone to save a fallen knight. Awkwardly, the protagonist smiles at how exaggerated the story has become. Charlotte declares she will defeat the one they call unmatched in the Empire. She intends to prove to the world that she is stronger. This victory, she believes, will prove she can protect her house from that man. Curious, the protagonist asks about that man. Charlotte names Count Brandenburg, the holy swordsman. Shock crosses the protagonist's face at the name. He realizes this is the Empire's dog who stabbed him in the back in his past life. Never did he think he would hear that name here of all places. Quietly, he realizes they share the same target, and she could make a good ally. But first, he decides, she needs a dose of reality. He tells her to come at him with everything she has. Gritting her teeth, she says that was already her plan. She lunges forward, a green aura flaring around her blade. Their swords clash in a burst of sparks. Charlotte deflects his attacks and counters with quick wrist snaps. Faintly, she channels aura to enhance each strike. She wields a rapier far too large for her small frame, powered by that same aura. Just as a mage generates mana through a circle, a knight accumulates aura within the body to exceed human limits. Again and again, their swords clash with incredible speed. The protagonist realizes she is a knight down to her very core. Confidently, Charlotte smiles as she presses the attack. She leaps into the air for a downward strike. At this level, she believes she holds the upper hand. A memory surfaces, her mother tucking her into bed as a child. Her father was gone from this world before she was even born. Every night, her mother told her stories of the divine sword. She was told she had to protect their house, as the proud daughter of the divine sword. Even after her kingdom fell and her house crumbled, Charlotte trained relentlessly. Why, she wonders, does her sword keep getting stopped by this boy? Calmly, Dale blocks her attacks with a steady defense. Something feels wrong. Charlotte senses it and pushes harder, screaming. She lunges with a desperate strike. Effortlessly, Dale parries, and she is left in shock. Her sword flies from her hand and sticks into the ground. She cries out about her heritage. The daughter of the divine sword, collapsing to her knees, she asks why she cannot win. Dale explains she cannot win because she is not the divine sword himself. Her pride as his daughter, he says, is not wrong, but as she is now, she cannot protect her house from that man, the holy swordsman. Notes is tens of times stronger than her current self. Desperately, Charlotte asks what she should do. Stepping forward, Dale swears on his family name. He vows to become the protector of House Orhart. Shock fills her eyes at his declaration. He and House Saxon, he promises, will be her shield until she grows strong enough. Why, she asks, would he do this, holding her sword? Dale says it is because her sword is worth it. He asks her to swear to become a blade for him and House Saxon. She hesitates for a moment, then realizes she cannot refuse such an offer. Kneeling, she swears upon her honor as a knight. It may have seemed like a childish promise, but the resolve behind it was strong enough to be called a vow. Later that day, in the Duke's office, Duke notes that Charlotte became a maid of House Saxon at her mother's request. She accepted without hesitation. He says, which was unexpected. He asks what happened between Dale and the girl. They made a promise, Dale explains. On the name of House Saxon, he vowed to protect House Orhart, narrowing his eyes. The Duke asks if he invoked their family name out of pity. Firmly, Dale denies it. And confidently, he reveals his true intentions. Charlotte is the last bloodline of the divine sword, he explains, and her talent is exceptional. Together, they swore a new oath. Charlotte's resolve burns fiercely. What he truly seeks, the protagonist reveals, is a new divine sword, wielded for the sake of their duchy. Approval spreads across the Duke's face at his son's ambition. Confidently, the protagonist smirks, knowing his plan is already in motion. The last bloodline of the divine sword now rests safely under their roof, and this move alone deals a devastating blow against the bastard Brandenburg. The scene shifts to the dark and ominous capital of Old Teutonia, in a fit of pure rage. Count Brandenburg smashes a glass against the wall. He screams that the arrogant fool dares to move first. Terrified, a subordinate apologizes for the failure, slamming his fist onto the desk. Brandenburg's fury boils over. He yells at his idiots for failing to capture a single little girl. The subordinate explains the assassins were killed before ever reaching House Saxon. Specs Charlotte herself fought them off. Disgust twists across Brandenburg's face. He curses his subordinates as a useless lot, storming away from the desk. He lets out a heavy and exhausted sigh. He stares at the glowing holy sword, lost in memories of better times. A dark flashback surfaces. The moment he stabbed the protagonist in the back. Affectionately, he speaks to the holy sword Durandal. Calls Charlotte his lovely fiancée, and tells her to wait for him, no matter what it takes. He vows to obtain the perfect heir to inherit the sword. Brandenburg orders his subordinate to contact the Thieves' Guild. Pay them whatever they ask, Brandenburg commands. A sinister and cruel grin spreads across his face. Bring me Charlotte, he demands. A week passes since Charlotte swore her oath of servitude. She adjusts to the ducal residence and studies intensely. She endures grueling maid training to adapt to her new life. Daily sparring with the protagonist becomes her strict routine. Helmut asks if the two children are ready to begin. Confidently, the protagonist says he is ready. Scoffing, Charlotte raises her rapier in defiance, smiling. Helmut commands them to begin the match. The two children clash swords with explosive speed. Steel rings out as they exchange rapid and fierce strikes. Disbelief crosses Helmut's face at the intense killing intent radiating from them. Is this really just a duel between children? He wonders. He realizes they are not yet on par with knights, but their speed is remarkable. Suddenly, the protagonist sweeps his dark cloak to blind his opponent. Caught off guard, Charlotte reels from the sudden tactical maneuver. Stepping in, Helmut stops the fierce exchange. He praises Charlotte for her excellent work. Dismissing the compliment, she asks what she is lacking. Helmut asks if she knows the true essence of the rapier. Confidently, she answers that the essence is thrusting, shaking his head. Helmut tells her she is completely wrong. The true essence, he reveals, lies in footwork and the legs. He points out how the protagonist evaded her thrust and closed the distance. She should have widened the gap, he explains, and waited for an opening, extending the arm too far. He notes, makes the blade shake and lose precision. She must rebuild her basics from the ground up, he tells her. Shock crosses Charlotte's face at his harsh assessment. Her posture and footwork, he adds, are unrefined and unconventional. She admits she has never had a proper teacher before. He promises to fix her bizarre thrusting stance. Furious at the description, Charlotte glares at him. Helmut laughs heartily and admits he was only teasing her, quietly. The protagonist realizes she will grow incredibly fast under Helmut's tutelage. He knows he must push himself harder to stay ahead of her. The protagonist reflects on the process of constructing monocircles. One must sense the flow and engrave the pattern into the body. This process, he understands, normally takes decades to complete. Shocked, Master Sephia asks if he has already completed his second circle. He confirms that he has indeed finished it. A monocircle is measured in rotations per minute. A typical first circle mage reaches around 300 RPM. His first circle measures an insane 2000 RPM, while his second sits at 400. The minimum requirement to expand a new circle is 300 RPM. Realizing this, he understands he has already met the requirement for the third circle. Now that he has attained his second circle, he decides to run a dangerous experiment. He decides to try enhancing his existing ice bullet spell. He strengthens the molecular bonds to increase its mass and hardness. Then he projects a large caliber barrel to boost rotation and velocity. He names the new spell Ice Bullet Armor Piercing Bullet. Devastating projectile launches forward with incredible speed. It slams into the target with tremendous force. The target is obliterated in a burst of freezing shards. Momentarily stunned, he stares at the sheer power of the blast. Was projecting an armor-piercing bullet always this easy? He wonders. Sephia praises him for learning so fast. As always, gratefully, he thanks his master, watching him. Sephia falls into thought. She reflects on his recent actions. From saving a knight to helping Charlotte, he always uses his strength for the right reasons. She realizes, sometimes, she admits, he frightens her. Gently, she touches his cheek. But even so, she knows he inspires even greater trust. Embracing him, she calls him her proud student. Caught completely off guard, he freezes at the sudden affection. Internally, he panics, thinking she is far too comfortable with physical contact. At dawn the next day, he stands alone in the ducal courtyard. He reflects on how much she startled him. Does she really just see him as a child? He wonders, shaking his head. He decides now is not the time for such thoughts. Resolves to focus entirely on his training. Casting a spell, he raises a wall of jagged ice spikes from the ground. He prepares a new variation, the Ice Bullet 12-gauge 00 buckshot. Multiple projectiles slam into the ice wall. The wall shatters under the barrage. Satisfied, he surveys the destruction. Next time, he decides, he will adapt it into a slug round. Suddenly, Charlotte calls out his name. He turns to see her standing there. So this is where he has been practicing. She notes, he confirms, and asks if she is there too. She explains she has been practicing the footwork Sir Helmut taught her. He observes that she seems to enjoy learning swordsmanship. Blushing slightly, she admits that she does. He brings up their earlier interaction, apologizing. She admits she has been reflecting on how rude she was to him. Bluntly, he agrees that she really has been quite rude. Shocked by his honesty, she stares at him, smiling. He says he will forgive her this time. Does he really mean it? She asks. He confirms, and tells her not to be so formal with him. Happily, she agrees, standing together in the snow. He mentions he really likes the weather here. He explains he can swing his sword until late at night, and the cool air refreshes him right away. Quietly, she listens. She smiles, realizing someone else feels the same way she does. That, she admits, makes her a little happy. The protagonist and Charlotte stand together in the snow as time slips quickly by. From the window, the parents watch how perfectly the two children look together. Quietly, the mother decides to keep a close eye on them, hoping to guide her son's feelings. The scene shifts to the slums, where the mother hands out food to the poor. The protagonist watches her provide relief to the homeless and beggars. Weekly, he and Charlotte have been helping her with this charity work. Holding a loaf of bread, the protagonist watches as Charlotte notices a distressed young boy nearby. The boy grabs her arm and begs for help. His mother is in danger. Following the boy, the protagonist and Charlotte make their way through narrow and complicated alleyways. Something feels off, the protagonist senses, especially since they left their escort knights behind. He realizes the request was made specifically to Charlotte, not to an adult. Above them, he spots a hooded figure watching from the rooftops. He identifies the man as an assassin from the Thieves' Guild, sent by the Holy Swordsman. Their true target, he realizes, is Charlotte. Wait here, the boy tells them. while he retrieves his mother. Suddenly, thugs emerge from the shadows and surround the two children. Mockingly, the leader tells the protagonist this is a dangerous area and orders him to leave. Don't interfere, he warns, if he wants to avoid getting hurt. Darkly, the protagonist smiles and steps in front of Charlotte to shield her. He declares his vow to protect the daughter of Orhart from thugs like them, mocking his chivalry. The leader orders his men to attack. Panicking, Charlotte realizes she left her sword behind. Calmly, the protagonist tells her not to be afraid. This, he thinks, is the perfect chance to test a new technique with his shadow cloak. The thugs lunge forward, and the protagonist activates the dark artifact. The assassins leap from the rooftops with blades drawn. A sudden gust of dark wind sweeps through the alley. The leader screams to his men, sharp instincts, the protagonist notes, but the warning comes too late for the others. The shadows latch onto the thieves like parasites. This is the new technique unlocked by his second circle. Agony rips through them as the shadows take hold. Horrified, the leader stares at the unnatural display. The alley erupts into chaos. He cannot comprehend the boy's power. A monstrous creature screeches. The corrupted thief screams. The leader orders his men to strike the monster down. They charge in a last attempt to end the boy's life, focusing all his killing intent on the protagonist. The leader launches a lethal strike infused with aura, but the strike meets only empty air. The shadows rise to meet the blade instead. The protagonist unleashes a devastating volley of ice. Buckshot tears through the leader's defenses. He is sent flying by the sheer force of the impact. Silently, Charlotte watches the brutal display unfold. The creature of undeath turns on the remaining assassins. The assassin leader refuses to fall, proof of an aura wielder's sturdiness. Screaming in defiance, he charges with a desperate lunge. Dale's shadows surge forward and pierce him before he can strike. Meanwhile, the corrupted thief screams of hunger and tears into another assassin. Turning to Charlotte, Dale asks if she is all right. She confirms she is fine, still sitting on the ground. Another assassin attempts to flee in terror. Dale fires a precise ice bullet, pinning the fleeing man to the ground by his foot, commanding the shadows to return. Dale watches the creature cease its attack, begging for his life. The captured assassin offers to tell everything he knows. Do you really know everything? Dale asks. The assassin agrees to talk. Without hesitation, Dale fires an ice bullet directly into his forehead, killing him instantly. He is not particularly interested, he says, in what the man had to say. The protagonist stands over the fallen assassins, Charlotte staring in shock beside him. She looks at the dark shadows, then at the lifeless bodies scattered on the ground. This, he explains, is the true face of House Saxon that people fear. This dark power, he says, is exactly what will protect her. Does it frighten her? He asks, seeing it up close. Just a little, Charlotte admits. Gently, she smiles and says it is okay, because he fought to protect her. A memory surfaces, Charlotte kneeling before him, swearing her solemn vow, if his house becomes her shield. She vows to become the sword that swings for his sake. She thanks him for teaching her the true meaning of the future, with fierce determination. She declares she will become even stronger. Thoughtfully, the protagonist studies her. Part of the reason he took Charlotte in runs far deeper than kindness. A dark memory surfaces, his past life, watching Sir Bartle die. Guilt over what happened to Sir Bartle 24 years ago is why he took her in. He reaches out his hand to Charlotte. Her decision to become his sword holds far greater meaning than she realizes. Gently, their hands touch and clasp together. The scene shifts to Count Brandenburg, sitting at his desk in a foul mood, clenching his fist. He curses his failed plan. A messenger delivers an official letter, inviting the Count to the Saxon Duchy, stern and commanding. The letter is a direct order from the Noir Duke, demanding accountability. He cannot refuse an imperial summons. Brandenburg knows this well. A few days later, the Duke welcomes the Count to the Grand Hall of Saxon Castle. Brandenburg arrives in heavy armor, his guards visibly tense, seated on his throne, the protagonist beside him. The Duke notes his quick arrival. Politely, the Duke apologizes for the humble welcome. Nervously laughing, Brandenburg asks what could be more urgent than the Duke's call. Coldly, the protagonist and Charlotte stand together, staring the Count down. Walking the length of the hall, Brandenburg notes the concern spreading through the empire. He brings up the alleged kidnapping that happened in broad daylight. Silently, the Duke stares him down, laughing. Brandenburg claims he can already guess why he was summoned. Would a loyal sword of the Emperor, he asks, ever be involved in something so disgraceful? Suddenly, the Duke's eyes glow purple, dark magic surging violently around his hand. A massive wave of dark energy blasts through the Grand Hall. Brandenburg and his guards are violently thrown back by the sudden gust of wind. Agonizing purple flames engulf the elite guards. Horror spreads across Brandenburg's face at the sudden massacre. Massive shadowy hands drag the screaming knights into the darkness. Even the elite knights of St. Magdalene cannot resist this power. The Duke remains seated on his throne, maintaining the complex magical circle. Under the overwhelming pressure, the holy swordsman is forced to kneel properly. The Duke commands, outraged. Brandenburg screams at the severity of the Duke's actions. Calmly, the Duke tells him to listen very carefully. There will be no second warning, under his breath. Brandenburg curses his situation, rising with an aura of pure darkness. The Duke shakes the very room. Even with justification, the Count realizes the Noir Duke is willing to go this far. The Duke says, for the sake of peace, still kneeling on the cold floor, if they touch his children again, the Duke warns. He will wipe out every last member of House Brandenburg. Gritting his teeth, Brandenburg clenches his fists in pure humiliation. Mockingly, the Duke offers him a place to rest and warm himself. Declining, Brandenburg claims circumstances prevent him from staying longer. Smiling, the Duke wishes him an uneventful journey home, his pride completely shattered. The Count storms out of the hall. Watching him leave, the protagonist realizes his father just humiliated one of the Emperor's most loyal retainers. Nervously, he sweats at the sheer scale of the political consequences to come. This single act of defiance will become the spark that sets the entire empire ablaze. It begins as the smallest ember of rebellion. Soon, it will become their duty to cut down the Holy Swordsman. The world will hear that the Holy Swordsman was forced to kneel, and the empire's core will shake. In his office, the Duke stands with Master Sephia. A massive pile of bloody corpses lies on the floor before them. Shock spreads across Sephia's face at the gruesome sight. These, the Duke reveals, are the corpses of the Thieves' Guild members who attacked the protagonist. Sephia stares at the gruesome pile of corpses. The protagonist, she realizes, slaughtered the entire Thieves' Guild completely on his own. The mangled bodies lie torn apart, riddled with countless holes. Their insides spill across the cold floor in a gruesome display. For the first time, Sephia begins to doubt her own teachings. Standing beside her, the Duke points to the sheer scale of the protagonist's extraordinary talent. Formally, he offers her the position of chief advisor. To help guide the boy, shocked, Sephir realizes he wants her to fully join House Saxon. Even his own strength, the Duke explains, is not enough to guide the protagonist alone. Her support, he tells her, is the only thing that can truly change his path. Silently, Sephia weighs the heavy responsibility. Finally, she bows her head and accepts the position. Understanding how the protagonist sees the world, she resolves, is now her most important task. Time passes quickly, and the grand day of the protagonist's 10th birthday finally arrives. The magnificent ballroom fills with powerful nobles and high-ranking officials. Unlike the year before, envoys from the royal court of the emperor have arrived to attend the celebration. At the grand banquet hall, the most notable guest arrives. Politely, the protagonist greets the red-haired Marquis Eurus with a nod. Slyly, the Marquis smiles and returns the greeting with deep respect. A lavish banquet hall displays towering cakes and exquisite desserts. Guests marvel at the sheer abundance of delicious food. They praise the grandeur and wealth of House Saxon. Nobles toast with champagne and admire the beautiful sight. Hard to believe, they agree, that they are in the remote northern territory. One noble admits feeling foolish for ever worrying about the distance from the capital. In force, the central nobles of the imperial capital have arrived. They form the emperor's faction, the most influential power block in the empire. The reason for their presence at the banquet is obvious. It serves as an implicit warning to the duchy, a message that the imperial family will not overlook any insult toward the holy swordsman. Right before the protagonist, the chosen messenger stands waiting, with a sly smile. The red-haired Marquis Eurus approaches. Feigned politeness colors his greeting to young Master Dale. He expresses his pleasure at finally meeting the legendary prodigy. Lord Crimson, Marquis Eurus, is the master of the Red Tower. He pursues flame, fury, and power through absolute order. The Red Tower mages are infamous for their obsession with strength being righteousness. They never hesitate to become executors of ambition. Quietly, the protagonist recalls being subjected to modification experiments by these very mages in his past life. Praising the genius prodigy of House Saxon, the Marquis continues. He mentions hearing rumors of unmatched talent that none in the Empire can compare to. He brings up the rumor of wiping out a horde of orcs to protect the family knights. At just 9 years old, he notes, as expected of the Duke's son, politely, the protagonist smiles and thanks him for the kind words, wishing the Marquis an enjoyable evening. He walks away, alone in the garden. The protagonist walks beneath the night sky. The annual birthday celebration, he admits, is exhausting. He would rather be training with Charlotte right now. Officially, she serves as his mother's maid, sparring with the daughter of the Divine Sword. He worries, could be dangerous for her reputation. Suddenly, a scream pierces the quiet night air. Shocked, the protagonist stops in his tracks. A rough voice yells at a maid to stay still. This scream, he realizes, might belong to someone he knows. Urgently, he rushes toward the sound. A terrified maid is seized by an unseen attacker, begging for mercy. She declares her service to House Saxon, screaming at her for daring to invoke the Duke's name. The fat noble presses a knife against her throat. Everyone is busy celebrating the birthday. He mocks. No one will notice. He threatens to slit her throat if she resists and demands she listen to him, appearing suddenly. The protagonist demands to know what he thinks he is doing. Terror crosses the noble's face at the sight of the young master's cold fury. Nervously, he asks what brings the protagonist to this secluded area, asks if he has ever enjoyed the company of a woman before, smirking. The noble claims the protagonist is far too young to have such experience. He offers to personally teach the boy a thing or two. Still gripping the terrified maid, calmly, the protagonist tells him not to worry and summons a glowing blue magic circle. He promises to get her out of this situation very soon. Arrogantly, the noble assumes no one would expect a noble to attack within this hierarchy. Suddenly, a sharp ice spike shoots forward, violently impaling his shoulder, collapsing in agony. The noble writhes on the ground while the protagonist declares he will not step back. Defying the emperor's people is dangerous. He acknowledges, but he remains completely unyielding, screaming in pain and shock. The noble is coldly commanded to kneel. Get on your knees, the protagonist shouts, and apologizes to the maid, gritting his teeth. The noble tries to use her status to justify his actions. Arrogantly claims he stands there as a direct representative of his majesty. Sharply, the protagonist asks if the emperor enjoys violating servants from noble houses for sport. Speechless, the noble screams in outrage at the accusation. From the shadows, the Duke and Duchess watch the intense confrontation unfold. Coldly, the protagonist issues a final warning. Kneel immediately, he commands. Softly, Marquis Eurus chuckles at the sudden shift in power, an interesting turn of events. In a panic, the mother rushes forward and demands to know what is happening. The protagonist explains that the man attempted to assault a maid of House Saxon. Shocked, she cannot believe he showed such disrespect to Lord Petro. The noble tries to claim the protagonist was being reckless. Did I give you permission to stand? The protagonist shouts. Frozen in shock, the noble falls silent at the sudden command. Turning to the honored guests from the imperial capital, the protagonist addresses them directly. They are entrusted, he states, with the duty of acting in his majesty's stead. This man, he points out, sought to defile a mere maid. Such an act, he declares, tarnishes his majesty's name in the process. Therefore, he could not stand by and let the disgraceful conduct go unpunished. Laughing, Marquis Eurus remarks on the situation. A clever young man, he agrees. The protagonist speaks nothing but the truth. Disgust colors his voice, that someone entrusted with the emperor's will would assault a lowborn maid. Summoning a flame in his hand, Marquis Eurus commands the noble to burn. A filthy insect, he calls him. The noble tries desperately to crawl away, begging for mercy. He watches the fire approach. Without mercy, the Marquis unleashes the flame upon him. Instantly, the fire engulfs the noble, consumed by roaring flames. He screams in agony as the fire burns him alive. Writhing on the ground, the noble burns to death. Turning to the protagonist, Marquis Eurus confirms he spoke nothing but the truth. Purging worms who insult the empire, he says, is his duty. Smiling, he says he looks forward to the protagonist's future with genuine respect. He addresses the young Master Dale, calm and calculating. The protagonist stares back at him. The commotion died down. The emperor's people departed and peace returned to House Saxon. After that, young Master Dale is told it is time to wake up. He groggily thanks Eve for waking him. She nervously expresses that it is an honor to serve him. He reflects on living in two worlds but still being unfamiliar with this feeling of being served. He resolves to use his name as the eldest son to bring the empire down. Duke tells Dale he is clever but his behavior has been odd. The Duke reveals that if the otherworldly hero had not died, the divine sword would likely have been wielded in the Saxon duchy. Dale calls it a blasphemous claim. The Duke asks how he can be so sure. Dale internally realizes he almost slipped up about his previous life. He explains that even though the hero defeated the Demon King, the Empire did not root out the darkness. Instead, they ordered the cultivation of the Demon King's land and bestowed it upon House Saxon. The Duke notes that as long as the darkness remains, their bleeding will not stop. People call them the Clan of Darkness. The Duke realizes the Empire will try to remove them as an internal risk just as they abandon the hero. Dale feigns surprise and claims he deduced this from records he has read. Duke is surprised because only a few know the truth behind the hero's death. Dale states that if his theory is right, the Empire is simply an oppressor. The Duke realizes this child has wisdom beyond his years. He asks what House Saxon should do moving forward. Dale declares that House Saxon can never coexist with the Empire. The protagonist questions how the hero was abandoned, while the man explains his deductions are based on records. Official history claims the hero met an honorable death after a fierce battle with the divine sword Bardal. The man admits his surprise since only a few know the truth behind the hero's death. The protagonist theorizes that the Empire is simply an oppressor that seizes weak nations by force. The man realizes this child has wisdom beyond his years. The protagonist asks what House Saxon should do and states they can never coexist with the Empire. The protagonist smiles confidently as he prepares to state his conclusion. The man is shocked when the protagonist declares they must destroy the Empire. The man calls out Dale's name in disbelief. The man demands to know if the boy understands what he is suggesting. The protagonist clarifies he is not saying they should raise the army and revolt right away. The protagonist suggests a timeline of 10 years from now, leaving the man stunned. The protagonist explains that resistance groups push for independence while vassals fear the empire and the economy shrinks as the aftereffects of war worsen. The protagonist declares that by then they will have built the strength to protect their house against the empire. The protagonist outlines his plan to support resistance forces in talks until the sun sets. The man asks for his thoughts and remains silent for a moment. The man bursts into laughter and praises the boy's boundless talents. The man acknowledges that the boy perceives sights even he cannot see. The man expresses his pride and declares the boy is no longer just a child or merely the eldest son. The man promises to treat him as his heir and the future leader of House Saxon. The protagonist accepts the role as the man promises to respect his words, and the boy realizes he has finally gained the authority he waited for. The Duke invites the protagonist to speak freely about the decision he will make for their family. The protagonist reminds his father of the promise to treat him equally and boldly requests permission to take the tower trial in the necropolis. The Duke is stunned by the request to enter a place where mages fight guardians to earn titles like Tower Elder and Magic Tower Master. The Duke questions if the protagonist truly wishes to go to such a dangerous place where he could lose his life. The protagonist admits he has not completed his third circle yet, but confidently states he will soon despite the usual age requirement being mid-20s. He explains that this decision is for both himself and House Saxon to solidify his status as heir through a trustworthy reputation. The protagonist wants to prove his strength rather than rely on rumors spread by gossip. The Duke accepts the reasoning and leaves the matter to the protagonist's judgment. The protagonist thanks his father and vows to prove himself. A few days later, the group arrives at the City of Death necropolis where servants bow before the Noir Duke. The protagonist stands beside his father looking exhausted and wonders if he pushed himself too hard this time. Duke Saxon and the protagonist arrive at the venue, drawing immediate attention from the crowd. Whispers spread about the unprecedented magic genius of the Empire. Skeptics note that the protagonist does not look very well today. Defenders insist the rumors about his skills are true. Claims circulate that his swordsmanship rivals the household knight's. Sneering blonde man dismisses the hype as a joke. Velik declares himself the top graduate destined to win the tower trial. He mocks the protagonist as a fragile noble brat who would fall over if tapped. The protagonist and his father approach the tower representative to pay respects. Eris greets them and expresses her honor to serve the young master. The father instructs the protagonist that Eris will assist him during the trial. The protagonist acknowledges his father and places himself in Eris's care. Eris leads the way and informs him that 59 academy graduates await. She gestures to the large hall filled with competitors ready for the tower trial. Eris addresses the gathered crowd from a balcony to explain the first-tier trial. She instructs everyone to check their life necklaces, which contain a shield spell. The trial is revealed to be a battle royale-style life point battle. Each necklace holds a single life point and a protective shield. Landing a valid hit on an opponent causes their necklace shield to shatter. The attacker gains 1 life point for every valid strike landed. Participants must reach a total score of +3 points to advance to the next floor. Eris adds that using artifacts will result in immediate disqualification for cheating. The protagonist analyzes the rules as an efficient way to weed out rookies. He reflects on the label of monster attached to him by his rivals. Velik and his group stare at the protagonist, wondering how he is a third circle mage at this age. Velik rallies his group to take down the monster first. Concerns are raised about attacking the Duke's son, but Velik dismisses them. Velik asserts that everyone is a competitor the moment they entered. The protagonist notes Velik's confidence and wonders if his abilities match his mouth. Eris shouts for the trial to begin as magic circles flare to life. A mage with gray hair unleashes a surge of purple energy. A loud impact echoes through the arena. Protagonist stands firm amid swirling purple magic circles. A low groan escapes from the shadows. A flash of light illuminates the dark surroundings. A desperate attacker lunges forward with a raised blade. The protagonist stands calmly with crossed arms while a massive undead freezes behind him. The enemy stammers in disbelief at the sudden turn of events. A wave of blue energy surges outward from the protagonist. The enemy cries out in pain as the cold bites into his skin. Ice crystals rapidly form over the massive undead soldier. The enemy realizes with horror that this is water element magic. Another undead is encased in jagged ice spikes. The enemy questions if the boy is a dual element mage. An undead soldier shatters into pieces of frozen debris. The protagonist glares with intense fury at the attackers. He demands to know who dares touch his undead soldiers. A swift movement blurs through the air. He declares that his ice armor makes their attacks useless. A bright flash of light erupts from the frozen undead. An enemy shouts that using water element spells breaks the rules. The protagonist maintains a calm and composed expression. The enemy insists that only necromancy and undead control are allowed. A woman with glasses watches the scene in silence. The protagonist argues that the trial continuing proves his point. The enemy grunts in frustration at the lack of intervention. He orders his team to block the undead and target the protagonist directly. The undead soldiers charge forward with terrifying speed. The enemy declares they will overwhelm him with numbers. The protagonist realizes that artifacts were also banned in the rules. He decides on a new course of action. A massive undead lunges forward with claws extended. The protagonist states that this is the only way. He steps forward with decisive movement. A loud impact resonates as he engages the enemy. He dodges a sweeping blade with precise timing. The protagonist smiles confidently and says he has him. He holds a weapon infused with purple energy. The blade slices through the darkness with a sharp whistle, cleaving the undead soldier in two as purple energy dissipates into the air. The spectators watch in stunned silence, realizing the sheer power behind that strike. Recognizing that Dale reforged the bones to increase the sword's durability. Dale grips the hilt tightly, the weapon humming with a low, ominous purple aura. He dodges a clumsy attack from a large undead brute, his movements fluid and precise. A massive explosion of light erupts as his blade connects, shattering the enemy's defense. Leaping high into the air, Dale prepares a finishing blow. The blonde mage watches in terror as his last undead soldier falls, realizing a mage shouldn't be able to handle a sword that well. Dale stands amidst the fallen enemies, his cape fluttering as he turns his gaze toward the remaining opponent. The mage stammers in fear, backing away as he realizes he is completely outmatched. He drops to his knees, begging young Master Dale to wait and declaring his surrender. Dale smiles confidently, lowering his sword slightly as he tells the mage to come on. He reassures the trembling opponent that it's not like he will really die. With a final decisive strike, Dale knocks the mage unconscious. The results are announced to the arena, declaring that young Master Dale passes alone with 60 life points. The crowd erupts into cheers as Dale stands victorious in the center of the ring. He looks forward with a confident smirk, knowing that everyone is watching closely. This victory marks his first step forward on the path to becoming a legend. The second tier of the tower trial introduces a massive guardian creature known as a flesh golem. Normally, surviving candidates would cooperate to defeat such a monster, but the protagonist stands completely alone. He casually admits that he already eliminated all the other candidates during the first tier. The colossal golem reaches down with a massive hand to crush the small boy standing before it. Unlike the previous tier, all forms of magic are now permitted for this intense battle. The protagonist smiles confidently as dark energy swirls around him, knowing this is more than enough. He sees this fight as the perfect opportunity to test the limits of his newly acquired third circle. The golem slams its fist into the ground, creating a massive explosion of dust and debris. The creature growls in anger, but suddenly finds its hands surrounded by strange purple energy. The protagonist stands calmly in the crater, while the golem looks at its own hands in confusion. He unleashes a powerful spell called Accelerated Decay, surrounded by glowing purple skeletal wings. Observers watching from the balcony note that the young master magic is highly unusual. They wonder why he chose to let the creature rot instead of destroying it outright with force. The protagonist recalls that in his previous life this strategy was just as critical as raw firepower. He calls this tactic biochemical warfare as the massive golem begins to melt into a puddle. The protagonist covers his nose and complains about the terrible stench of the rotting corpse. The observers watch in silence, realizing that the grotesque process of biochemical warfare is being expressed through black magic. The protagonist completes the exam by breaking through all the way to the 10th tier and setting a new record. He is granted 4 days of rest before the 11th tier trial begins. Meanwhile, the other participants gather outside the tower to recover from the unprecedented massacre of the first tier. A rare retrial is permitted for the 59 other candidates with the exception of the protagonist. That same night after the trial, the protagonist stands alone near a glowing fountain. Someone calls out his name and compliments him on his splendid performance. The protagonist calls out to Master Sephia with deep gratitude. He credits his success entirely to her teachings. She smiles softly and admits that his words make her proud. The protagonist suddenly asks Master Sephia if she would like to go on a date with him. She stares at him in complete shock and stammers in confusion. He excitedly points out that a city festival is happening right now and insists they should go. She hesitates for a moment but eventually agrees to go with him. The protagonist cheers happily while she stands there looking thoughtful. She realizes that technically he is not wrong about the situation. She suspects the protagonist must be misunderstanding what a date actually is. The scene shifts to the lively Necropolis City Festival filled with cheering crowds. Fireworks explode in the night sky above the bustling streets. Master Sephia notes that he must be tired after such a difficult trial. The protagonist insists he is fine and mentions there are still days left before the next trial begins. She nods and says that is good to hear. They walk together in silence under the moonlight. The protagonist notices that conversation does not flow easily like before. He realizes that the silence is not uncomfortable because it has always been this way with Sephia. He thinks maybe it is because she believed in him from the start. He finds himself wanting to get closer to her. A flashback reveals the day he attained his third circle. He sits in meditation and finally understands what Sephia meant by facing the inner world. He struggles against the pain of overflowing his mana capacity beyond the second circle. He realizes he must endure rampaging mana to attain the third circle. Multiple magic circles explode with intense energy around him. Suddenly finds himself holding a mysterious black sword in a white void. He looks around in confusion at the strange place. Master Sephia explains that deep meditation inevitably manifests the inner world. The protagonist realizes this frozen landscape is his own world of realization. He sees that there was nothing there from the start except absolute emptiness. He holds a glowing blue crystal in his hands within that hollow world. He remembers that Master Sephir reached out her hand to him in that emptiness. The blue-haired elf master confesses her feelings with genuine warmth. She embraces the young master under the starlit sky. Dale reciprocates the affection with a gentle smile. They share a tender moment as master and student. Dale reflects on the advantages of living life a second time. A few days pass and the tower trial approaches. Dale stands in the 11th tier arena. He acknowledges that his romantic progress with Sephia has stalled. He realizes she dismissed his confession as a childish crush. The young master decides to focus on the examination instead. The trial format is announced as a one-on-one magic duel. The victor will advance to the 12th tier. Third circle master Albert Rosenheim steps forward as the opponent. Albert greets young Master Dale with formal respect. He warns that he will not hold back due to Dale's age. The 11th tier trial allows all kinds of artifacts and mage strategies. Dale realizes his life necklace cannot guarantee complete safety. With artifact restrictions lifted, Dale decides not to hold back. He resolves to crush his opponent completely and demonstrate the difference in power. The duel begins with Albert launching a surprise attack. Purple magical energy erupts from Albert's spell. Albert warns Dale to stay sharp during the confrontation. He declares that Dale's winning streak ends here. Albert casts Dark Arrow with devastating force. Multiple purple projectiles rain down toward Dale. Dale prepares to counter the overwhelming assault. He launches a barrage of purple energy projectiles that tear through the arena. The protagonist dodges through the explosions and lands amidst the purple smoke. He notes that attacking before the duel begins is a clear violation of the rules. The judges watch silently without intervening to stop the duel. He realizes they must be curious to see how strong he really is. The protagonist expresses his deep dislike for mages as more attacks rain down. Albert commands his creations born from darkness to swear eternal obedience. Shadowy figures rise from the ground and surround the protagonist. The protagonist looks unimpressed and finds the dramatic incantation embarrassing. He acknowledges that Albert is definitely stronger than a typical rookie. The shadowy servants charge forward with weapons drawn to attack. The protagonist dodges a heavy axe swing from one of the servants. Albert mocks him for dodging and claims he cannot win by avoiding. The servant swings again with glowing white eyes in a frenzy. The protagonist uses a shadow technique to vanish from sight instantly. Albert asks if he has nothing else to show and casts a death explosion. A massive explosion of purple and black energy erupts across the battlefield. Albert declares himself the victor but looks around in confusion. He realizes the protagonist has vanished completely from the arena. He calls it cowardly to cheat against a kid while searching frantically. Albert looks around nervously wondering where the protagonist went. The protagonist appears directly behind him using Wraith transformation. He remarks that Albert looks a bit flustered by the sudden appearance. Albert admits it was a clever sneak attack but claims it is not enough to defeat him. The shadow cloak creature manifests and screams about being incredibly hungry. It asks its master if it can eat the opponent right now. A figure searches desperately through the swirling purple darkness. He activates his Wraith transformation as dark energy envelops him. But Dale's hunger-driven power surges forward with terrifying intensity. Dark shadowy tendrils erupt and lash out violently. The opponent screams in agony as the shadows consume them. Bystanders watch in horror at the brutal assault. Dale observes, calmly noting they got too excited from hunger. The defeated opponent begs for mercy on the ground. Dale commands his power to stand down. The shadows dissipate and the opponent collapses. Round 1 is declared won by Dale. He casually asks who wants to face him next. But his next opponent immediately surrenders, wanting only to live. From round 3 onward, all remaining matches end in default victories. Dale continues refining his 3 magic circles as he advances. He breaks through each tier's guardians with growing mastery. By the 20th tier, a truly worthy opponent finally appears. The Headless Knight emerges, a creation of the Noir Tower Elders. Observers warn this opponent is unlike any before. They caution this might be the highest Dale can go. Dale smiles and remarks it would be boring if everything went as expected. The Headless Knight charges forward with its blade raised, but then the knight suddenly drops to one knee in submission. Onlookers stare in shock at the unexpected surrender. Dale stands silently watching his latest opponent yield. The protagonist floats high above the arena while looking down at the heavily armored guardian kneeling before him. He commands the guardian to end its own existence. The armored knight drives its flaming sword straight through its own chest. The massive suit of armor collapses into a heap of twisted metal and scrap. The protagonist observes that the Guardian's loyalty was so absolute it abandoned its duty to obey him. His eyes widen slightly as he realizes he might have gone a bit too far with his command. He stands in the center of the arena while the shocked spectators stare at him in disbelief. He reasons that their shock is natural since his creation just betrayed its original master to swear loyalty to him. He realizes this feat proves he has reached a level equal to the Noir Tower Elder. Deciding he has proven himself enough, he turns around and begins to walk away. The confused spectators whisper among themselves as they watch him head toward the exit. He knows that even if he could ascend higher, there is a line he should not cross. Beyond this tier lies a realm that even monsters fear, something truly unknown. The protagonist walks toward the bright light of the exit as his trial comes to an end. The tower trial concludes with the spectators left in stunned silence. A loud announcement echoes through the hall declaring the arrival of the Magic Tower Master. The entire Noir Tower rises in unison like a disciplined military parade. The protagonist stands proudly beside his father in front of the massive gates. Both nobles and elders alike bow their heads to show their loyalty. Every mage of the Noir Tower pays their deepest respects to the father and son. The protagonist smiles confidently as he looks out at the gathered crowd. Thanks to his overwhelming performance, the Northern Territories begin to unite under their banner. The snowy forests of the Northern Empire Saxon Dukedom witness a brutal campaign. Armored knights clad in dark purple steel charge through the freezing woods. A commander swings a massive blade, unleashing a wave of purple energy that decimates the enemy. The cavalry roars in unison, charging forward for young Master Dale and House Saxon. Upon the successful completion of the tower trial, Duke Saxon assigned the protagonist command of the Orc Horde Extermination Squad. A knight brings a heavy mace down on an enemy, crushing them instantly. It was a task far too great for a 10-year-old child. Regardless, no one doubted his competence as a commander. Thus, as the rightful heir to the Duke of Noir, he gradually began to unite the North. The protagonist stands tall in his armor, raising his sword in victory. Scene shifts to the Grand City where the Duke sits at his desk. A soldier reports that they have slain 145 orcs. The protagonist asks about their cavalry losses. The report states only 3 sustained minor injuries and otherwise none at all. The Duke asks if magic was used to protect them. The protagonist denies it. The Duke smiles proudly, stating this was purely the result of the swords of House Saxon. The Duke praises the protagonist for a job well done. Sir Helmut laughs, noting that the protagonist has grown comfortable commanding large cavalry units. The protagonist credits Sir Helmut's teachings. He recalls how Sir Helmut instructed him in swordsmanship, tactics, and military strategy. Helmut jokes that it won't be long before the protagonist is leading full-scale territorial wars. The protagonist smiles at the thought of territorial wars, always welcoming a new stage. A blonde girl with green eyes lunges forward with a sword, shouting a battle cry. The protagonist parries her strike, their blades clashing with sparks flying. She channels a green aura into her blade, her expression fierce. The protagonist dodges her thrust, the blade slicing past his face. The protagonist leaps over the blonde girl, striking down from above. Their swords clash violently in the air. The protagonist lands and looks back with a sharp gaze. He tells the blonde girl she has improved quite a bit. She looks away and admits she knows she cannot compare to him. The protagonist laughs and asks if he teased her too much. The protagonist stands confidently in the training grounds while Charlotte acknowledges his remarkable achievements. She notes that he has already become a third circle mage and conquered the tower's 20th tier. Everyone constantly refers to him as young Master Dale with endless praise. The protagonist reassures Charlotte with a warm and encouraging smile. He promises that she will grow stronger as well through dedicated training. Charlotte blushes slightly at the compliment despite her competitive nature. Considering she is only 10 years old, Charlotte has already achieved exceptional skill by any standard. Charlotte protests loudly and demands they stop treating her like a child. The protagonist points out the obvious truth that she is indeed still a kid. Charlotte retorts sharply and points back at him with equal frustration. The protagonist declares confidently that he is already an adult despite his young appearance. Charlotte suggests they simply move past this childish argument. The scene shifts to an elegant classroom where today's lesson is about to begin. The instructor announces that they will study the hammer and anvil tactic. The lesson explains how cavalry forces deploy on one or both flanks during battle. The key strategy involves the cavalry breaking through enemy wings to encircle them completely. Meanwhile, the infantry blocks the enemy cavalry's advance to hold the center. The instructor confirms the protagonist's understanding of the tactical maneuver. This formation is named for its similarity to placing iron on an anvil and striking with a hammer. The tactic relies heavily on superior cavalry forces to execute properly. The protagonist realizes this is only possible because of the legendary Black Cavalry. He reflects that patterns of war remain similar across every world he has known. The instructor shifts the conversation to ask about Charlotte's training progress. The protagonist reports that Charlotte's progress has been truly remarkable. While she cannot compare to his own abilities yet, her growth is impressive. Charlotte has already established a solid foundation in swordsmanship. Soon she will officially inherit House Saxon's aura cultivation and swordsmanship techniques. However, the protagonist expresses one remaining cause for concern. He questions whether Charlotte has true compatibility with their sword style. The narration explains that mages refine mana into magic through their heart circles. Knights refine mana into aura through their cultivation techniques instead. Mages form magic towers through mastery of structure and magical theory. Knights form orders by passing on their sword techniques through generations. Among these traditions, Charlotte's path forward is becoming clearer. The Black Cavalry of the North charges across the battlefield like unstoppable war chariots. The Night Crow Knight Order of House Saxon demonstrates overwhelming raw power. Their strength clearly shows how the Northern Knights specialize in crushing the battlefield with brute force. But Charlotte's sword technique focuses on speed and fluid motion. She wields a quick, free-flowing sword with elegant precision. Given her talent, she might make it to the lowest ranks of the 7 swordmasters, but she will never become the first sword. The pinnacle of the 7 swords, the position once held by her father, the Sword of Blossom. If only that sword art still existed. However, it was completely lost upon the fall of the Night Nation. Could it truly have vanished from this world forever? After that, Dale's days grew even more relentless. As he balanced monster subjugations with his studies, his reputation continued to grow steadily. The time had come to demonstrate the results of his progress. A neighboring territory led by Baron Parker has filed for territorial war. He is claiming ownership of a copper mine that belongs to you. That is correct. In this world, borders between lands and nations were far less clear-cut than one might think. Still, a low-ranking noble picking a fight with a high-ranking noble is absurd. If I refuse to yield the mine and accept the challenge, Count Brandenburg has reportedly sided with the Baron to uphold his claim. Furthermore, a letter arrived, offering to dispatch the Knight Order of St. Magdalena in exchange for a portion of the mine's profits. So that is how they want to play it. He still has not forgotten the humiliation he suffered from my father that day. If that is how it is going to be, then I will answer in kind. The protagonist realizes Count Brandenburg intends to play a dangerous game. He understands the Count seeks revenge for the humiliation received from Duke Noir. Brandenburg chooses a border region to settle the score where his presence remains ambiguous. The protagonist asks his father to let him personally command the battle alongside the knights. The Duke refuses immediately, stating it is too early for him to shoulder such a responsibility. The Duke warns Baron Greenbelt that war against people differs from slaying monsters. He promises to protect the Baron's mine himself to ease his worries. The protagonist sighs in frustration because he knows he is capable, but his father won't listen. Helmut comforts the disappointed young master and suggests the Duke has his reasons. Helmut reveals a strategy game board and invites the protagonist to learn with him. The protagonist recognizes the game as a war simulation resembling chess from his past life. Helmut is surprised that the young master is already familiar with the complex rules. Helmut suggests they discuss the battlefield while playing the game. The protagonist grabs the board and rushes off to challenge his father. The Duke looks up in surprise as his son presents the strategy game. The protagonist proposes a deal where victory in the game grants him permission to join the war. The Duke questions his resolve after hearing his argument about the contest of minds. The protagonist asks to be evaluated through a single match to prove his strategic mind. Helmut tries to intervene, but the Duke stops him. Duke decides to let the match happen and grants the wish if the protagonist wins. The protagonist thanks his father for the opportunity to prove himself. The Duke sets the stakes that a loss means abandoning the idea of participating in the battle. The game begins and pieces clash on the board with intense speed. Helmut watches in shock at the protagonist's incredible skill. The protagonist declares victory as he checkmates his father on the board. The protagonist sits across from the Duke at a chessboard. The Duke acknowledges the advantage given to young Master Dale. Superior troop numbers and favorable terrain were granted. The protagonist won 2 out of 3 matches against the Duke himself. The Duke stands and reminds the protagonist of the promise. The protagonist confirms the agreement with a casual response. The Duke questions when the protagonist learned chess. The protagonist claims to have found a rulebook in the library years ago. The protagonist admits this was a lie to avoid seeming strange. The Duke accepts the promise and grants full command of the knights. The protagonist's companion expresses shock at the Duke's decision. The Duke emphasizes that House Saxon's honor is at stake. Defeat will not be accepted under any circumstances. The Duke asks one final time if the protagonist can shoulder this fight alone. The protagonist smiles confidently and asks for his father's trust. The protagonist vows to prove his capability. The Duke agrees and tells him to return victorious. The scene shifts to Brandenburg's stronghold at Malberg. Count Brandenburg yells at his son Philip about drinking in the slums. Rumors spread that House Saxon's young son will personally lead their knights. Count Brandenburg demands to know what Philip is doing. Philip dismisses the threat as just a 10-year-old brat. Philip requests permission to crush the arrogant brat with the knights. Count Brandenburg slaps Philip across the face. Philip stammers in shock at his father's reaction. Count Brandenburg reveals the true nature of House Saxon's son. He calls him a monster impossible to catch up to in 100 years. Count Brandenburg insults Philip as inferior even to a 10-year-old. Count Brandenburg regrets not securing Charlotte sooner. Count Brandenburg entrusts Philip with command of the knights. Philip accepts excitedly despite his father's contempt. Count Brandenburg reveals Philip's role is merely to stand and look pretty. The actual command will be handled by Sir Milvas. The Duke declares that Philip's job is merely to be the army's figurehead and that will suffice. He orders Sir Milvas to take Philip away as the boy screams for his father. The Duke turns away in frustration and curses that he wants to take the field himself but cannot go all out against a child. He shouts at Duke Saxon and suspects that this situation was part of his plan. Dale stands beside his father with a smug expression and confirms the Duke's suspicions. A few days later, the scene shifts to Baron Greenbelt's territory. Baron Greenbelt waits nervously outside his castle. The soldiers respectfully greet young Master Dale of House Saxon. Dale thanks them for coming such a long way. The soldiers whisper in disbelief that he is just a child and wonder if he can even swing a sword. They try to reassure themselves by recalling his title as a prodigy. Baron Greenbelt tells Dale that they feel reassured and truly relieved to have him there. Dale thanks the Baron politely. The Baron internally complains that they actually sent a 10-year-old boy. He thinks that entrusting full command to someone so young is too much even with the Black Cavalry. The Baron invites Dale inside to attend the banquet they have prepared. Dale refuses and states that they do not have much time. The Baron is confused and asks what he means. Dale suddenly draws his sword and startles the Baron. He demands to inspect the condition of the troops under the Baron's command. He asks specifically who the strongest soldier among them is. The brown-haired man trembles in fear and demands to ask one more time. The protagonist smiles confidently and asks who is the strongest among those under his command. The red-haired knight steps forward and declares that it is him. The knight boasts that no one capable of defeating him has been born in this place yet. The knight insults the protagonist for strutting around with a sword just because his family bought him a position. The knight threatens to put the protagonist in his place. The protagonist stares back with intense blue eyes. The brown-haired man gasps in terror as he holds his sword. The protagonist states that everyone here seems to be doubting his ability. The protagonist notes that they doubt him because he is a mere 10-year-old put in charge without discussion. The protagonist admits he is also doubting the competence of their knights. Protagonist suggests that the surest way to clear mutual doubts is with the sword. The protagonist reveals the amusing part about their so-called strongest knight. The protagonist exposes that the knight is drunk off his ass. The protagonist states he doesn't even need to question him as he is proving the doubts himself. The knight asks if drinking also gave the protagonist courage. The knight draws his sword and accepts the challenge. The knight introduces himself as Harbuck and vows to prove the steel of the Baron's sword on his honor. The protagonist smiles calmly. The two stand opposite each other in the training grounds surrounded by watching knights. The protagonist asks if the knight has heard of his sword. The knight laughs loudly. The protagonist says he has heard plenty about the knight's peculiar sword. The protagonist wonders where that confidence comes from. The knight wonders if the protagonist really has something up his sleeve. The knight charges forward and shouts that he is coming. The knight leaps into the air for a devastating downward strike. The protagonist parries the knight's blade. The knight looks shocked at the blocked attack. The two clash swords in a rapid exchange of blows. The protagonist parries another strike with a smirk. The protagonist realizes the knight's sword isn't even infused with aura. The knight swings his blade with full force. The protagonist notes that only high-ranking knights can use aura blade. The protagonist decides to respond in kind since the knight is giving his best. The protagonist summons dark shadows around his blade. The knight is shocked and asks what the hell this is. The red-haired knight struggles to block the relentless barrage of attacks. He curses the artifact that keeps disrupting his concentration. Dale observes that the knight's skill is actually quite unimpressive. A sudden realization strikes the protagonist as the fight ends abruptly. The elite knight collapses to the ground with a heavy thud. Dale wonders if the man was truly an elite knight at all. Baron Greenbelt screams in outrage at the young master for disabling his man. Dale calmly asks the Baron if he understands his current situation. He states that such pathetic skills would only drag their forces down. Dale accuses them of planning to sit back while House Saxon does all the work. He declares that the Saxon house serves as a shield but demands they fulfill their duty. Dale announces that his duchy's knights will serve as their sword until the battle. He forces the knights to choose between following him or losing their land. The knights immediately kneel and swear their loyalty to the young master. Night falls over the mansion as a blonde woman tries to dismiss her worries. The Duke lies in bed and reflects on the immense potential of their child. He strokes his wife's hair and predicts the sights their son will witness are beyond fathom. He smiles with absolute certainty that their child will one day become the ruler of this world. The protagonist sits in a chair looking utterly exhausted and declares there is no hope. He realizes he has been nothing but a frog in a well. He reflects on how pathetic the world outside that well truly is. He deduces the holy swordsman must have known the truth about Greenbelt beforehand. He clenches his fist and declares he has plans of his own as well. The next day the castle grounds are filled with knights struggling to pull massive boulders. The knights collapse under the crushing weight and beg for the torture to stop. The protagonist sits under a red umbrella on a grand chair and mocks their weakness. He yells at them for daring to call themselves Knights of the North. A knight whines about being injured, but the protagonist dismisses the complaint. He orders Sir Bale to teach Baron Greenbelt's knights everything starting with stamina training. Sir Bale bows and accepts the command. The protagonist then orders a messenger to be sent to Baron Parker's territory to propose negotiations. Sir Bale looks confused by the sudden request for talks. The protagonist clarifies he has no intention of accepting humiliating peace terms. He smiles slyly and reveals he simply wants to see someone before the battle begins. A massive white tent stands guard at the border between two baronies. Inside, the protagonist analyzes the strategic map with cold precision. He knows they have only a few weeks before the Night Order launches a preemptive strike. Baron Parker's forces are not to be underestimated in this looming conflict. Lord Philip enters the negotiation tent with an air of arrogance. The protagonist smiles slightly as he recognizes the two figures before him. He identifies the hollow figurehead Commander Philip sent as a mere puppet. Behind him stands Sir Milvas, the true commander of this battle. The protagonist offers a polite greeting to the blonde noble. Philip laughs mockingly and taunts the boy for fearing a real war. The protagonist ignores the insult and asks why Philip agreed to negotiate. Philip tries to answer but is immediately cut off by the protagonist. The protagonist declares he is not addressing the puppet but the real commander behind him. He addresses Sir Milvas, the pure sword, directly. Philip stammers in shock while Milvas glares with sudden intensity. The protagonist questions why a holy swordsman would entrust command to someone without talent. Milvas shouts for Philip not to let the words shake him. Milvas panics, internally wondering how the boy knows the secret of Philip's disgrace. The protagonist asks how it feels to know his own father has no trust in him. Milvas declares the negotiation over and urges Philip to leave immediately. The protagonist asks if Philip even requires permission to speak to his subordinate. He points out that lowering his head to a subordinate makes him look like a slave. The protagonist compares the situation to a dog putting a leash on its master. Philip bristles at the insult of a dog mastering him. Milvas screams for silence as the psychological warfare intensifies. The protagonist leans back and concludes he cannot tell which master Philip truly serves. The protagonist smiles confidently and reveals his entire tactic is to disrupt the enemy command. He admits he never intended to negotiate in the first place. He orders Sir Bale to step outside for a moment. Sir Bale obeys the command immediately. The protagonist sits alone at the table with the enemy commanders. He asks to speak privately now. He specifies he wants to speak just between the two highest-ranking commanders who truly bear responsibility. Lord Philip looks annoyed but agrees to the terms. Sir Milvas looks worried as the situation escalates. Lord Philip shouts at Sir Milvas to leave them at once. He asserts his authority as the highest-ranking commander. Sir Milvas hesitates, but Lord Philip insists handling the brat is his responsibility. Sir Milvas realizes internally that Lord Philip has completely fallen for the trap. Sir Milvas bows and leaves the tent. The protagonist thanks Lord Philip for the private audience. He reiterates that he requested this meeting strictly for negotiations. Lord Philip asks if he has something that can persuade him. The protagonist confirms that is correct. The protagonist leans forward and proposes that if the Night Order withdraws immediately, House Saxon will provide all supplies for their return journey. Lord Philip stares in shock at the offer. He slams the table and asks if the protagonist dares call that a negotiation. The protagonist calmly states that he does. He apologizes if his earlier words offended the commander. He firmly requests that they withdraw their forces. He warns that otherwise their army will be annihilated and hundreds of knights taken prisoner. He adds that the holy swordsman's reputation will fall and Lord Philip's name will be dragged through the mud. He declares this is the final chance to maintain even a shred of dignity. Lord Philip laughs and accuses the protagonist of mocking them from the start, just as Sir Milvas predicted. The protagonist smiles darkly and calls it a shame. He states that was Lord Philip's last chance. Lord Philip asks what he said and if he isn't afraid. The protagonist explains that when the battle is lost, the blame will not fall on the commander. He reveals the blame will fall on the incompetent and useless firstborn of a count. The enemy commander stands tall and warns the protagonist that his confident smirk will not last much longer. The protagonist sits calmly and vows to prove his true strength before everyone present. The negotiations officially collapse and the scene shifts to the Greenbelt barony shortly after. Enemy scouts stand on the castle walls and peer through a spyglass to observe the battlefield. A scout reports back that the Knights of House Saxon have officially begun mobilizing. The enemy commander stares intensely and reflects on the terrifying composure of that young child. The commander realizes the protagonist absolutely did not have the face of a mere beginner. He acknowledges that even though he is a 10-year-old child, he is not an opponent to underestimate. A gauntleted hand grips a sword hilt tightly as the commander decides this is precisely their chance. He resolves to cut the boy down and end his growth while he is still just a child. The blonde knight draws his blade and rallies his troops to teach the brat the meaning of silence. The enemy soldiers cheer loudly and raise their weapons in eager anticipation of the slaughter. A messenger rushes toward the protagonist and reports that the main enemy forces are finally moving. The protagonist smiles confidently and commends the scout for the excellent work. The protagonist raises his sword high into the air and declares that the time for the swords of House Saxon has come. He sits atop his white horse and commands his army to show the enemy blood worthy of their name today. The massive army of black-armored knights roars in unison and raises their blades to the sky. Soldiers charge forward with fierce battle cries echoing across the battlefield. The 1st Cavalry Battalion advances with weapons raised and determination in their eyes. Strategic minds calculate that stopping the Night Crow Knight Order of House Saxon is the key to victory. Concerns linger about the enemy's unknown firepower capabilities. Lord Philip must be positioned in the center of the formation for protection. Baron Parker's forces move to the left wing to engage the Greenbelt Knight Order. Elite troops prepare to strike the Night Crow Knight Order from the flank. The commander rallies his forces shouting they must not miss this chance. Soldiers scream warnings that the situation is dangerous. Warriors charge forward shouting for the county. Intense combat erupts as forces clash with devastating impact. A defiant warrior declares it won't go the way the enemy wants. Soldiers express relief and shock that they survived the initial assault. Young Master Dale arrives personally at the front lines on horseback. Troops recognize their young master has come to fight alongside them. Dale commands everyone not to retreat and to fight to the end. He rallies his forces shouting for House Saxon. The enemy commander observes they intend to settle this with a direct clash from the very start. He acknowledges Dale willingly making himself the bait as expected of no ordinary man. The blonde commander smiles knowing this is exactly what he wanted. He charges forward rallying his troops for the Knight Order of St. Magdalena. Warriors shout not to let a single enemy reach their lord. The entire army charges with overwhelming force. The enemy commander declares they will end this swiftly. He leads the 1st Cavalry Battalion forward vowing to defeat Dale and end the battle. He rallies his elite troops to defeat the protagonist and prove their reputation on the battlefield. The commander swings his weapon with immense force, striking down an enemy knight who screams in agony. He parries a heavy blow with intense focus, his expression hardening as he pushes back the assault. The commander rides over a fallen enemy and pants heavily, realizing something feels wrong about the battle. He notes that they are pushing back the enemy elite forces far too easily for a legendary unit. An enemy commander shouts orders to retreat and reform their formation as the Night Crow Knight Order collapses. The blonde commander wonders why the infamous Black Cavalry is falling back so quickly and feels a sense of unease. A messenger arrives with urgent news from the left wing, reporting that Baron Parker's forces are being overrun. The commander stares in shock as he realizes the left wing is in critical danger. An enemy knight screams in terror as a red-haired warrior unleashes a dark and terrifying aura. The red-haired knight questions why the Greenbelt forces are suddenly using aura with such intensity. A messenger reports to Lord Philip that the left wing is requesting reinforcements as House Saxon's aura knights break through the lines. Lord Philip looks absolutely horrified, wondering how the enemy aura knights reached that position so quickly. A subordinate demands orders from a sweating Lord Philip, who realizes the blame for the impending defeat will fall squarely on his shoulders. A messenger rides up frantically to deliver urgent tactical advice from Sir Milvas. The messenger explains the recommendation to merge cavalry units to reinforce the collapsing defense. Lord Philip grabs the messenger by the collar and screams in pure fury. He commands all rear cavalry to redirect toward him for a strike on the right wing. He screams his desperate intention to kill the protagonist before his left wing completely collapses. A captain looks on in sheer horror as he realizes the protagonist is bringing the entire rear cavalry toward them. The captain stammers in complete disbelief at the sudden shift in momentum. He realizes his original orders to save the left wing have been completely ignored. A chessboard visualization reveals the right wing is already pushing back the weakened enemy left wing. The visualization shows that additional reinforcements will only clog movement and reduce efficiency. Lord Philip rides furiously while completely blinded by his obsession with striking the enemy commander. The narration reveals he has ignored all calls for aid, leading to a catastrophic misjudgment. The chessboard shows the left wing will completely collapse and surround them if this continues. A captain urges Lord Philip to retreat before it is too late. Lord Philip refuses the retreat with a stubborn and determined expression. He looks back at his men with a fierce resolve to continue the fight. The protagonist stands confidently on his horse with his sword drawn while stating the battle is not over. Lord Philip glares furiously and vows to crush the protagonist's arrogance himself. He draws his sword with a sharp and deadly sound. He raises his blade high into the air to rally the 1st Cavalry Battalion. A captain tells him there is only one path left for them to take. The knights eagerly beg for the command to charge into battle. Lord Philip closes his eyes and grips his sword tightly as he prepares for the final assault. The knights raise their swords in unison and pray in the name of Saint Magdalena. They pray for the pure sword to be blessed in the coming fight. They pray for the protection of Goddess Sistina to be upon them. They pray for the sister goddesses to grant them grace and mercy. Lord Philip's eye glows with intense red light and pure killing intent. He shouts to break through the enemy lines and take the enemy commander's head. He raises his sword high and commands his men to follow him. The cavalry charges forward with thundering hooves as they follow their commander into battle. Knights charge forward on horseback with swords drawn and battle cries echoing through the air. The blonde commander leads the assault while shouting orders to his forces. The protagonist watches from his position as the enemy cavalry finally closes the distance. A commander's field of vision narrows under the pressure of frontline combat. The weight of war and anxiety clouds even the most experienced judgment. The protagonist draws a glowing blue magical bow while mounted on his steed. The blonde knight stares in shock as magic manifests before his eyes. The protagonist fires an ice bullet with a mocking question about their inexperience. The magical projectile strikes true and knocks a knight from his saddle. The enemy commander marvels at the impossible accuracy while riding at full gallop. The protagonist notes that such skill requires serious mastery of mounted archery. The protagonist raises his hand and summons a massive wall of ice from the ground. Crystalline structures erupt from the earth and block the entire path forward. The blonde knight realizes the ice wall has completely cut off their pursuit. The protagonist shouts the command for all forces to begin the counterattack. Dark armored knights charge forward with orders to protect the young master at all costs. The enemy forces clash in a brutal melee of steel and determination. The blonde knight realizes they have been completely outmaneuvered. Their goal was never to defeat him but to protect their commander and buy time. Lord Philip's tactical error has twisted the entire front line out of shape. The center forces became overcrowded on the right flank and lost all formation. The blonde knight screams in frustration as he realizes the only option left. He channels golden energy around his blade and charges straight at the ice wall. The commander breaks through the barrier with a powerful slash and roaring determination. He confronts the protagonist directly and declares he will face him personally. The protagonist stands confidently on the battlefield as the sun sets behind him. His smirk reveals complete control over the situation. The battlefield stretches across the horizon with defeated knights scattered on the ground. The protagonist observes the captured enemy forces with calculating blue eyes. He reflects that their habit of overestimating Aura knights remains unchanged. The blonde knight commander kneels in frustration and defeat. The protagonist recalls how the battle doctrines of the Knight Order of Saint Magdalena became their fatal weakness. He remembers that the jailer who watched over him in his previous life was the holy swordsman who led that very order. A flashback shows the protagonist surrounded by knights in a dark chamber. He came to know their methods as clearly as his own palm. The protagonist smiles knowing he understands them completely. A knight rushes in to report that Baron Greenbelt's forces have broken through. Another knight announces that Commander Baron Parker has been captured. The blonde commander Milvas clenches his fists in anger. He curses that idiot Philip for this disaster. The protagonist notes that Lord Philip clearly did not trust Milvas much. Milvas realizes with shock that this was a trap from the very beginning. The protagonist explains that the battlefield is always chaotic and unpredictable. He states that those who court their own ruin in chaos have only their foolishness to blame. The protagonist offers mercy to those who beg for their lives for a few gold coins. He asks if they will also beg for their lives. The captured knights refuse with outrage and pride. They declare they would rather die than beg. The protagonist smiles coldly and accepts their choice. He declares that then they will have to die. A knight is struck down instantly with a brutal attack. The protagonist turns his gaze to Sir Milvas. Milvas remains silent, weighing his options. Subordinate knights shout his name in desperation. The protagonist watches with thoughtful interest. Milvas realizes he is not afraid to die himself, but he must pass on the truth to his knights. He realizes the protagonist is truly dangerous. Milvas drops to his knees and commands everyone to kneel. He declares they will surrender according to Empire traditions. He demands proper treatment as prisoners of war. The protagonist observes this unexpected turn silently. He notes that Milvas would go as far as kneeling to beg for their lives. The protagonist realizes that no further provocation will matter now. The blonde knight shouts in denial as the protagonist stands over him with a dark smile. The protagonist declares that no one present will survive this encounter. He commands his forces to kill them all with a cheerful expression. The elite warriors of the Night Crow Knight Order gasp in shock at the ruthless order. Imperial custom usually dictates that captured knights are released upon payment of ransom. Despite this tradition, the protagonist's voice remains completely unyielding. A weapon strikes down decisively as the knights prepare to execute the command. For the Knights of Saxon, the orders of their young master are more absolute than anything else. The blonde knight realizes he has brought about his own ruin on this battlefield. He curses the protagonist as a filthy brat while gritting his teeth. He screams in defiance and charges forward, refusing to fall so easily. A blinding flash of light erupts as he is struck down instantly. He collapses to his knees and is pinned to the ground by two spears. The protagonist walks calmly toward the defeated knight. He leans in close and addresses the man as Sir Milvas. The protagonist asks if the knight remembers his death. The knight looks confused and stares back in disbelief. The protagonist smiles and recalls seeing the knight's face on that specific night. A dark flashback reveals the knight standing among armored figures. The protagonist reveals that the knight was present when his lord drove a sword into his back. The knight's face turns pale as the memory resurfaces. The protagonist asks the young knight once more if he remembers that death. The knight stammers in terror, claiming such a thing is impossible. He screams in horror, asking if the protagonist really clawed his way back to life. Dark energy explodes violently around the knight as the protagonist stands smiling. The protagonist confirms his return with a simple yes. He smiles brightly and admits that he finally feels a little bit relieved. Fierce battle rages across the battlefield as knights clash with brutal force. The right-wing cavalry falls under overwhelming assault. Sir Milvas and all the Aura knights lie dead on the ground. The left wing breaches long ago as the black cavalry surrounds the main force. Philip comes to his senses and realizes they have already lost. He keeps getting flashbacks to that mocking gaze and smile. His men desperately beg him to make a decision. Philip refuses to accept defeat and declares they will fight until the very end. He commands his knight order to never kneel. His men warn that they will be wiped out if they continue. Philip demands to know if they dare disobey the highest-ranking commander's order. He screams for the final charge. Philip panics and screams for his men to protect him. He regrets not living differently if he knew this was the end. He wanted to die on a bed, not on a battlefield. A dark hand reaches toward him. The black cavalry cheers as victory becomes certain. Dale stands calmly and states everything went exactly according to plan. He acknowledges young Master Dale's success. Philip kneels on the ground and demands to be let go. Dale observes that Philip really hates surrendering. Philip claims they may break but will never be defeated. Dale calls that a convincing line for someone who ran away to save his own skin. Philip insists he has a duty as commander to survive until the very end. Dale states that since the battle is over, there is no need for Philip to stay alive. Philip desperately accepts the duel and stakes the fate of the battlefield on a one-on-one fight. A dark-haired character with glasses calls it absurd. Dale calmly agrees to accept it. Philip smirks and says he will accept it. He sees an opening and lunges forward. Philip reveals he knew Dale would accept it. He screams at Dale to die as he attacks the arrogant little brat. The knight is lifted into the air by dark shadows while the protagonist watches calmly. The knight screams in agony as the dark energy consumes him. He is thrown to the ground in front of his comrades. The knight begs for his life on his knees. The protagonist looks down at him with a cold and unyielding gaze. The knight continues to plead desperately for mercy. The protagonist remarks that the knight is choosing to live a pathetic life until the very end. The war that had been so loud and grand ends with a ridiculous scream. Trumpets sound to signal the end of the conflict. The protagonist returns victoriously on horseback amidst falling confetti. The citizens cheer for the young master who has returned from the battle. People whisper about the countless enemy corpses left behind. Some worry about the awful lot of blood spilled in that battle. Cardinal Nikolai of the Church of the Goddess Sistina watches with a sinister smile. He notes that the child's blade is pointed at the enemy for now. He fears that one day the blade will not hesitate even if pointed at their own people. The protagonist enters the grand hall and is called by name. A little girl named Liz runs towards him with open arms. The protagonist embraces her tightly and says he missed her so much. Sir Helmut congratulates the young master on his first victory. The protagonist thanks Sir Helmut for his support. They walk together through the hall past Sefia and Charlotte. The protagonist approaches the Duke and Duchess seated on their thrones. He kneels and formally reports the victory to his father. The Duke praises him for leading them to victory. The protagonist states it was a victory made possible by the sword of House Saxon. The Duke thanks Sir Bale for guiding the protagonist well. The Duchess smiles warmly and tells him he must be tired. She encourages him to get some good rest for now. The protagonist thanks his mother and smiles with quiet confidence. The protagonist reflects on returning to the Saxon ducal castle after months away. He feels a sense of comfort, realizing he has finally come back to a real home. Meanwhile, Count Brandenburg sits in his office looking furious and anxious. Two injured survivors limp into the room with a crutch and a sling. Brandenburg demands to know where Philip is and why only they returned. The survivor trembles as he explains that the Knight Order of St. Magdalena was completely wiped out. He reveals that Sir Milvas and all the Aura Knights were killed in the battle. He adds that House Saxon captured young Master Philip and his attendants as prisoners. The survivor stammers that the enemy demanded an enormous ransom for their release. Brandenburg's eyes darken with rage as he processes the devastating news. He accuses the survivors of suffering a crushing defeat and shamelessly running away to save their own lives. The men scream in terror as the Count's killing intent fills the room. Brandenburg asks if they are prepared for the punishment reserved for deserters. The survivor begs for forgiveness while tears stream down his face. Brandenburg orders his guards to drag them to the basement dungeon to make them beg for death. The men scream in horror as they are hauled away by the guards. Narration reveals that this battle would later be known as the Black and White Turning Point. The story of the protagonist showing no mercy to screaming enemies spread far and wide. He earned the fearsome title of the Black Young Master among the people. Time passes and the protagonist turns 11 years old. The Duke informs him that he has a special gift for his 11th birthday. He announces that he will appoint the protagonist as a Viscount of the Saxon ducal territory at the official ceremony. The protagonist stares in shock at the unexpected promotion. Narration explains that a Viscount holds the authority to act as a lord's representative. The protagonist realizes his father has finally kept his promise to treat him as an equal head of the house. He bows and thanks his father for the honor. The Duke asks what he intends to do now that he has been given this authority. The protagonist states that as his Grace's representative there is something he wishes to do. The Duke looks at him with curiosity and asks what it is. The protagonist mentions the rumors that the Black Young Master showed cruelty by killing every prisoner. He notes that knights armed with faith in the goddess became victims of his alleged cruelty. He points out that the church will not be pleased by such actions. He declares his wish to depart on a pilgrimage to the papal state of Sistina. He explains that he will go there to shoulder the weight of the infamy he has sown in person. The long-haired man stares in silence, unable to understand the decision. He argues that fear is a tremendous asset that cannot be traded for anything else. He questions why the protagonist would deny his own infamy to cultivate favor with the church. The protagonist smiles brightly and replies that the church is a faction worth accepting that much for. The long-haired man, seated on a grand throne, asks if he has some other plan in mind. The protagonist confirms that he does. He declares that he is going to make them an offer they cannot refuse. He adds that while he is at it, he will get his hands on the forbidden grimoires too. A vision of a dark, skull-adorned book floats beside him. The scene shifts to a few days earlier. The protagonist lies in bed, trapped in a nightmare. A skeletal figure with glowing purple eyes looms over him and asks if he remembers. The skeleton demands to know if he remembers its death. The protagonist, with a serious expression, replies that they remember their death. Voice echoes in his mind, commanding him to remember death, memento mori. A flash of violence and blood fills his vision. The protagonist wakes up gasping for air, clutching his chest. He realizes the nightmare was a memory from the abyss of the mind. It was the darkest scene he saw within the mind world when he forcibly opened it to form his third circle. He reflects that controlling one's inner world is both the beginning and the end of a mage. And yet he is tormented by loneliness and nightmares because of that very world. He clenches his fist, calling it a pathetic spectacle that is totally ridiculous. He admits that he is still lacking. To fully control his mind world, he needs greater power. Just as a knight has his sword at his side, a great mage has a grimoire at theirs. The scene shifts to a carriage traveling through a lush forest. They are at the border between Baron Greenbelt's territory and Baron Parker's territory. This is where the northern regions of the Empire end and the central lands begin, beyond the reach of Duke Saxon's hand. For Baron Parker, who had been defeated in battle against the protagonist, only one choice remained: banditry. A group of men on horseback charge forward and shout to shoot. Arrows fly through the air and strike the carriage. A bandit yells, asking how they dare try to pass through Baron Parker's territory without asking permission. One of the hooded figures inside the carriage calmly asks what it is they want. The bandit leader demands a toll, claiming it is common sense to pay when setting foot in a noble's territory. The hooded figure pauses for a moment. He then agrees, stating that as it happens, he prepared a certain sum to pay the toll. The bandit with the red headband smirks and acknowledges their knowledge. Two men examine a document under the open sky. The black-haired man laughs as he inspects a heavy bag of gold coins. He remarks on the hefty amount demanded for a simple toll. He decides to let them pass just this once, seeing their sincerity. The carriage begins to roll away with the two hooded figures seated on top. The bandit calls out for them to come again next time with a greedy laugh. The heavy wheels turn as the carriage picks up speed along the dirt path. The two bandits exchange a satisfied glance and a knowing smile. A sudden command to stop echoes through the air as a boot blocks the path. A blond man with a mustache steps forward and declares this is Baron Parker's procession. The red-headed bandit demands they show respect before the Baron. The Baron shouts in outrage that they dare cross his territory without paying a toll. The hooded figure questions the demand for a toll with cold disbelief. The taller hooded figure states they already paid that price to a subordinate moments ago. The younger hooded figure asks if it is not illegal to collect a toll twice in one territory. The bandits laugh mockingly and call their claim nonsense in broad daylight. They claim to have only just met and pretend ignorance of the previous payment. They arrogantly assert that they follow the Empire's laws more than anyone else. The Baron holds up an axe and demands they hand over everything if they value their lives. The bandit beside him agrees enthusiastically with the threat. Narration reveals this man survived to the very end of a famous turning point. He is identified as the so-called hero who turned the tides. Baron Parker, the younger hooded figure, laughs softly at the absurd title. The bandits stare in confusion at the unexpected reaction. The boy questions the title of a hero who turned the tides. He adjusts his collar and states that memory is pretty different from what he remembers. The Baron freezes in shock as a chill runs down his spine. He stammers in fear and realization of who stands before him. The Baron stammers the name young Master Dale in sheer terror. The Baron tries to calm his men and tells them not to panic. He shouts that there are only two of them and they can win. Archers on the cliff above take aim with their bows drawn tight. They declare this is a fight they can easily win against such odds. The command is given for the archers to take aim at the carriage below. The taller figure asks young Master Dale to give the order. Dale confirms that the act ends here and they must drop the pretense. The Baron screams the order to fire in a desperate attempt to survive. A volley of arrows shoots through the air toward the two figures. Dale stares calmly as the deadly projectiles rain down upon him. The taller figure moves with blurring speed to intercept the incoming arrows. A dark figure wreathed in purple energy acknowledges the command with absolute loyalty. The archer realizes too late that his arrows are useless. Purple energy explodes outward in a devastating slash. Agony rips through the noble as his arm is severed. Cold eyes behind glasses show no mercy or hesitation. A massive shadow construct erupts from the ground, terrifying everyone present. The blonde noble begs for his life in absolute terror. He drops to his knees, swearing lifelong loyalty to the young master. Dale smiles sweetly while asking why he would do that. The noble's face contorts in horror at the cold response. Dale has encountered countless robber nobles and bandit knights during his journey. Several weeks pass as they travel across the central continent by boat. The companion announces they have finally arrived at their destination. The magnificent papal state of Sistina rises before them in all its glory. Dale identifies it as Pucel, the city of the Holy See. He finds the concept of a holy city completely absurd. A blonde figure in religious robes claims he came on a pilgrimage. But the truth is the word that fits better is judgment. Two figures in dark cloaks walk through the grand hall towards a throne. The protagonist and his companion approach with serious expressions. The cathedral is massive and bathed in light with a figure sitting at the far end. The protagonist offers his greetings to the eminence. He addresses the man as Cardinal Nikolai. Nikolai Makia sits on the throne with a warm smile. He is a powerful sixth circle white mage and one of the 12 clergies. Nikolai comments on the blood spilled in the recent battle. He expresses regret for the sacrifice of the Knight Order. He also finds the political outcome deeply regrettable. The protagonist closes his eyes and claims poor judgment caused the sacrifices. He says he is here to atone for the blood spilled. He explains he came on a pilgrimage to conceal his strength. The companion looks on with a skeptical expression. The protagonist hopes his thoughts are not in vain. Nikolai watches him and analyzes the situation. He recognizes the protagonist as the genius son of the Noir Magic Tower. He wonders if the battlefield horror caused this guilt. He dismisses the protagonist as just an 11-year-old brat despite his talent. Nikolai smiles, thinking this works out well for him. He tells the protagonist that the goddess's mercy is open to everyone. He claims there is no sin that cannot be washed away. The protagonist listens silently while holding his beads. He asks if that is truly the case. Nikolai confirms that it is right. The protagonist then asks if that is why he sold the nation to the Empire. Nikolai is visibly shocked and starts to sweat. He tries to laugh it off and calls it a joke. Protagonist ignores him and recalls the time before the annexation. He mentions that 12 cardinal bishops tried to persuade the Pope. He points out that Nikolai was there as well. He explains the Pope refused the treaty until the very end. An image shows the Pope being attacked. The Pope was eliminated by the Empire's hunting dogs through betrayal. The protagonist asks if the goddess forgave the sin of selling the country. Nikolai's facade breaks and golden energy erupts around him. He shouts that the protagonist speaks forbidden truths. He asks if the protagonist believes the goddess's mercy is on his side. The protagonist shouts back, asking if killing a proxy will silence anything. He states the Duke did not come to dig into secrets. He says they want Nikolai to pay the price for their silence. The protagonist internally admits this is all a lie. He thinks the Duke cannot imagine what is happening right now. Nikolai looks stressed and anxious. He asks what it is that the protagonist wants. The protagonist smiles and mentions a secret archive beneath the cathedral. He says it is where the church keeps its forbidden books. Nikolai is stunned into silence by this specific knowledge. The protagonist requests permission to access the forbidden library of hell. The lowest level holds the most horrific grimoire in the world, known as the Book of Black Goat. He descends the stairs alone with a lantern, since only one person may enter. The church declares they will not be involved no matter what happens inside. The cardinal restricts him to bringing out only one grimoire. He demands the protagonist swear eternal silence regarding the church's disgraceful secrets. The protagonist swears on the name Saxon as the successor of the Duke of Noir. They clasp hands to seal the sacred oath. A glowing angelic figure manifests as the contract magic G's takes effect. The protagonist stakes both their hearts as collateral for the contract. The oath is formed through the pride of the White Magic Tower. He realizes there is no room for doubt now. He knows breaking the contract will burst his heart. He stands before the massive gate of hell. He reads the ominous inscription warning entrance to abandon all hope. He pushes the heavy doors open and steps into the darkness. The place is a massive dungeon borrowing the name of a library. It houses forbidden books that are uncontrollable treasures bringing disaster. He knows a mage needs a grimoire just as a knight needs a sword. The desire to obtain an excellent grimoire is natural despite the danger. He encounters a group of armored guardians approaching him. He realizes these people who preach light are no different from his tower in using corpses. The guardians surround him with menacing intent. Dark magic flares up as the confrontation begins. The protagonist realizes there are no witnesses and decides to stop holding back. He unleashes a barrage of dark energy called Shadow Bullet. The assassins are struck down instantly by the overwhelming attack. Standing amidst the corpses in the library, he admits it feels good not to hide his strength. He takes a dagger and prepares to finish what he came to do. He cuts his hand and proclaims himself the rightful successor of the immortal Duke's bloodline. He summons the black goat of the forest to fulfill an ancient contract. The demons react wildly to the scent of fresh, powerful mage's blood. Multiple voices fight over who gets to form a contract with him. One entity aggressively claims him as its contractor. A massive, muscular demon with red eyes emerges from the shadows. It senses the intense hatred and stench of slaughter in the room. The demon looks at the pool of blood and corpses strewn about. It offers a contract to slaughter every one of his enemies. The demon promises to hold a festival in an ocean of blood with the corpses of those who stand in his way. The protagonist floats amidst floating bodies and wonders if this is the mind world of the grimoire, the Book of Massacre. A dark figure holds a glowing red book, which is a secret art of wicked blood magic containing the essence of mass killing. Its power and value are beyond description, as its name suggests. However, the protagonist stands firm in the bloody landscape. He commands the entity to step down. The hooded figure glares with glowing red eyes and declares the protagonist is not the one he is looking for. The protagonist kicks the entity away as it screams in outrage at being refused. The entity asks if the boy thinks he can leave this place alive after that. The protagonist smiles confidently and asks why not. He stands in a dark void and declares this is merely a world inside a book. He states that the entity's world cannot invade his. The protagonist smiles as dark purple energy surrounds him and says his world is different. A dark world devours the red world as the hooded figure and a winged demon stand in the encroaching darkness. The figure realizes this world should resemble the twisted thoughts of a heinous war criminal who committed forbidden mass destruction magic. He cannot believe the world of a sixth circle high-ranking mage is being pushed back so easily. The figure screams in shock at being swallowed up by the world of a mere child. The protagonist calmly states that the number of people the entity's owner killed doesn't even compare to his past. He admits he can't even remember the cities he razed to the ground anymore. He believes that is enough to reflect how many he has killed. The entity screams in agony and swings his scythe, refusing to be swallowed up. A massive crescent slash shatters the entity into pieces. The figure looks at his broken weapon in disbelief. He stammers that it is impossible as the protagonist stands calmly. Protagonist watches the entity crumble into rocks in the red world. The red world shatters like glass, revealing a library setting as the protagonist asks if she has come back. A girl with white hair and horns appears behind him and greets him as handsome. The protagonist looks back and asks why she called for him. The girl smiles happily and says she has been so lonely all this time. She asks with a creepy smile if he will play with her. The protagonist stands in a library and comments on the cold and lonely atmosphere. He focuses on a dark grimoire known as the Book of Black Goat. The book was written by the immortal Duke Frederick, who sacrificed his daughter for power. He realizes the avatar is not the Duke's real daughter but a construct. He asks the Horned Girl to make a contract with him. She agrees and asks to see his world. They appear in a snowy landscape that the girl finds beautiful. She expresses her strong liking for the protagonist. Cardinal Nikolai and his knights suddenly appear to confront them. The cardinal is shocked the protagonist obtained the forbidden book. The protagonist asks why the cardinal came all this way. He quotes the rule that contracting parties bear no responsibility. He notes that a G's was not enough to reassure the worried cardinal. He tells the Mage of Light he chose the wrong place to walk into. The cardinal claims it is a misunderstanding. The girl asks if she can eat the intruders. The protagonist agrees but warns her about stomachaches. The cardinal begins a holy prayer to summon divine aid. Angels with glowing wings appear behind the knights. The cardinal commands them to destroy the servant of Satan. The protagonist smiles and realizes this fight will not be easy. Winged knights dive from the sky with blades drawn. They swoop down toward the protagonist and the Horned Girl with lethal intent. The protagonist dodges the incoming strikes with swift agility. He unleashes a barrage of shadow bullets at the descending angels. The winged knights evade the dark projectiles with impressive speed. The priest watches the exchange with a mocking smirk. He taunts the protagonist about being limited to the third circle. He claims the boy cannot draw out the full power of the forbidden grimoire. A massive angelic manifestation appears in the sky with a halo of light. The divine figure chants a hymn that amplifies the pressure on the battlefield. The protagonist and the horned girl struggle against the overwhelming holy aura. The horned girl screams in frustration at the deafening chant. She unleashes a torrent of dark tentacles to silence the noise. The winged knights slice through the shadowy appendages with their holy swords. An angel declares judgment upon the fallen creature. The protagonist stares in shock as the angel lunges for the kill. Dark energy suddenly erupts and pierces through the attacking angels. The winged knights scream in agony as the shadow power corrupts them. The priest watches in horror as his creations fall. The corrupted angels begin to chant the hymn in a distorted and broken voice. The priest trembles in terror at the sight of his mind-controlled soldiers turning against him. A fallen warrior collapses to his knees while feathers drift through the blood-stained air. The shadow entity descends upon the helpless angels with terrifying hunger. Agonizing screams echo through the hall as the dark power devours its prey. A corrupted knight smiles grotesquely while savoring the scent of destruction. The horned girl grins with malicious delight as she prepares to feast slowly. Dark tendrils wrap around the fallen warriors and drag them into the abyss. The black young master reveals himself as an evil god that devours the flesh of angels. The cardinal stares in absolute horror as he realizes the boy is no ordinary prodigy. The protagonist stands tall in the snow while the world recognizes him as a child of the devil. The protagonist looks down at the kneeling cardinal while the terms of their contract echo in the silence. The cardinal trembles on the frozen ground as he realizes the true meaning of his own words. The desperate man begs for his life while the protagonist questions his true desire to survive. The protagonist extends his hand and demands to know what the cardinal can possibly offer. The terrified noble stammers out promises of wealth and power in a desperate bid for survival. The protagonist smiles coldly and expresses his satisfaction with the desperate offer. The cardinal asks what exactly the boy wants while trembling in the freezing snow. The protagonist demands everything the man possesses while the cardinal screams in disbelief. Cardinal realizes the contract must be rewritten as absolute obedience binds him through a G's. The protagonist smiles darkly knowing there is no longer any room for the cardinal to escape. The horned girl calls out to the protagonist with a cheerful and unsettling greeting. She expresses her delight at playing with him and declares her fondness for his world. The entity promises to wait for him in this realm as the snow continues to fall. The horned girl smiles creepily and asks if the protagonist is afraid of her true nature. The protagonist smiles calmly and denies any fear while acknowledging her dangerous existence. He realizes this power is far too dangerous to summon lightly and must remain a hidden trump card. The entity asks if they can play together again someday as the dark tendrils fade away. The protagonist shares a heartfelt farewell with the grimoire spirit in the snowy landscape. They promise to play together again before he departs the library of hell. The disturbance in the Forbidden Realm finally comes to a peaceful end. The eldest son of House Saxon receives full acquittal for his sins from Cardinal Nikolai Makia. An unprecedented holy ceremony bridges the gap between the duchy and the church as an act of atonement. Dale travels back to his territory openly and no longer hides his identity as a pilgrim. No one dares to block the path of the black young master now that he has the church blessing. Several months pass and Charlotte trains intensely in the snowy courtyard with a massive greatsword. Helmut watches in amazement as she demonstrates a completed realm of the aura blade at such a young age. Dark energy flares around her as she swings the heavy weapon with terrifying precision. Dale steps forward to formally ask Charlotte of House Orhart to swear loyalty as his knight. She drives her sword into the ground and kneels while swearing to protect the weak and punish evil. In the name of Saxon, he appoints her as Dame Charlotte, his official knight. Dale asks if she is truly sure about her choice of weapon and path. Charlotte smiles and admits she likes the sword of House Saxon because it shaped the person he is today. She chose the heavy greatsword over a rapier entirely of her own will to follow in his footsteps. The protagonist smiles gently at Charlotte while acknowledging the difficulty of her adjustment. He reflects internally that he may have underestimated her immense talent. He informs her of intelligence regarding a massive orc warband gathering beyond the Demon King's territory. He reveals that the orc warboss is leading the horde personally. He explains that his father will mobilize the ducal forces and summon the northern lords for the campaign. He declares his intention to join the campaign as well. He looks at Charlotte with serious intent and asks her to stand by his side in the coming battle. Charlotte stares at him in surprise at the sudden request. He formally asks her to join him as his knight. Charlotte remains silent for a moment as she processes the weight of the offer. She finally agrees to his request with a determined look. She places her hand on her chest and vows to become the sword that protects her lord. The protagonist smiles confidently knowing his blade will now be wielded for her alone. The Duke sits at the head of a grand table and reviews reports of large-scale southward movement by an orc warband. He identifies the threat originating from the Darkland beyond the northern frontier. A noble inquires if this marks the start of another wave of barbarian invasions. Another noble confirms that such an outcome is most likely. Narration reveals that when the hero of the past once joined forces with the Empire to slay the demon king, peace was believed to have arrived. The truth was that some demon races had merely fled south from the barren Darkland to survive. These events would later be known as the barbarian invasions. The Duke issues strict orders to summon the Northern Lords and the Noir Magic Tower along with all subordinate knightly orders. He declares that this battlefield will be on a scale unlike anything seen before. The Duke turns his gaze specifically toward the protagonist. He calls out the protagonist's name with a serious tone. He announces that it is time to teach the protagonist how to utilize necromancy on the battlefield. The protagonist looks back in shock at the sudden declaration.